Chapter 2196. Zhang Chan borrowed the Weili given by Zhang Yan and escaped into the real world somewhere in the Mirror Lake. He quickly found the child and placed him in a Taoist palace in Yanjiao. When the spirit of creation entered the world, it could be any living being. It could be as small as an ant or as large as an elephant or whale. In fact, if it did not have a physical body, it could even become a Khanate demon. However, it was fundamentally different from all other living beings. This time, it became a human body under the influence of Zhang Yan's Weili. The child's name was Meng Hu. He was born smart and could learn everything at once. However, he was mischievous and unusually energetic. He always caused trouble for his subordinates. Zhang Chan didn't have much patience for mischievous children. His attitude was always simple and rough. If he didn't obey, he would beat him. Anyway, as the reincarnation of the spirit of creation, he was gifted and had thick skin. He wasn't afraid of being broken by ordinary punishment. Therefore, every time the child saw him, he was obedient and didn't dare to make trouble. Meng Hu, recite today's lesson and the palace's instructions 3 times. Meng Hu said yes and recited it 3 times. Even though he was already familiar with it, he still slowly recited it word by word. Zhang Chan was very satisfied to see that he didn't have any impatience. He followed Zhang Yan's instructions. He didn't want to teach Meng Hu to become a great medic, but to have his mind lean towards the side of humanity. Because even if he didn't teach Taoism, the spirit of creation could still walk on the road of cultivation by observing the natural Tao and breathing in the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. Moreover, there wouldn't be any bottlenecks along the way. If he got the Shenshi, it was very likely that he would reach the level of Danyi. Meng Hu saw that his teacher was in a good mood. He wriggled in his seat and asked, "Master, when can I join Yanjiao?" Zhang Chan glanced at him and said, "You want to join Yanjiao so badly?" Meng Hu nodded vigorously. The Taoists of Yanjiao flew in the sky and burrowed into the ground. They captured and killed demons everywhere. In his opinion, it was really happy and unfettered. Zhang Chan could tell what he was thinking, but this was also what he was willing to see. The reason why he brought Meng Hu to the Holy Ji Palace was because he wanted Meng Hu to be influenced by what he saw and heard, and he would view himself as a person who taught. The current situation was undoubtedly a good one. He asked, "How's your cultivation going?" Meng Hu jumped up and said excitedly, "I can already step on my qi and fly into the clouds." Even though Zhang Chan knew that the spirit of creation was born extraordinary, he was still amazed. At this time, Meng Hu was not even 7 years old. If it was an ordinary person at this age, it would not be suitable for them to enter the Tao. At the very least, they would have to wait until they were in their teens before they could enter the Tao. He said, "With your current ability, you can only watch from the sidelines. You can't even run away. Come down and cultivate with me for a few years. It won't be too late to discuss this matter after your temperament has stabilized." Meng Hu said excitedly, "Yes, master." In the hundreds of years that followed, Meng Hu would either follow Zhang Chan to cultivate Tao techniques, or fight demons and monsters together with the Taoists of Yen sect. However, every time he asked when he could join Yen sect, Zhang Chan would say that the time was not right. As his cultivation grew, he always felt that there seemed to be someone watching him from the back while he was sitting and watching. One day, he returned from killing demons outside. Because he had consumed too much mana, he could not return to the inner chamber, so he adjusted his qi dynamics in the main hall. However, in a moment of absent-mindedness, he realized that he seemed to be immersed in an unfathomable land. Then he heard a voice from behind him, "You've finally come." Meng Hu was shocked and turned his head to look. He saw a Taoist standing there, but the figure's face was shrouded in darkness. He asked curiously, "Who are you? What land is this?" The Taoist said, "This is your own heart realm. I am you and you are me. However, I know you, but you don't know me." Meng Hu rolled his eyes and said, "Can you speak human language?" The Taoist was not annoyed, but said meaningfully, "I know you don't believe me. When you know your own nature, you will naturally understand what I'm saying." Meng Hu asked doubtfully, "My own nature?" The Taoist said, "Don't you feel that your natural cultivation speed is faster than ordinary people?" Not to mention among your peers, even among those seniors, no one can compare to you. And if you continue to cultivate, you will soon catch up to them and even surpass them. This is all because your natural nature is extraordinary. Meng Hu nodded repeatedly and said as a matter of course, that's natural. How can I, Meng Hu, be compared to ordinary people? Heaven gave birth to me to achieve great things. You're right. Maybe I still have many strengths that even my own family has not discovered. I wonder if you can tell me? He looked at the Taoist with great anticipation. The expression on his face was clearly saying, if you have anything good to say it quickly, I can bear it. The Taoist was silent for a moment, as if he felt that if he continued to talk about this, he would deviate from his original intention. So, he changed the topic and said, I know you have always hated the different races. Meng Hu said casually, so what? You can tell me what other strengths I have? The Taoist decisively interrupted him and said, but do you know that even your teacher is actually a demon? Meng Hu revealed a look of shock and said, my teacher achieved Tao as a different race. The Taoist said in a deep voice, exactly. He sneered, you are now going everywhere to suppress the different races. Have you ever thought that your teacher is also one of them? But he has been deceiving you for so long. Now that you know this, how are you going to face him? Meng Hu pondered for a moment and said, oh, the next time I see my benefactor, I'll definitely try to ask him what kind of unusual creature he is. At the end of his sentence, he seemed to have thought of something funny and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Seeing his reaction, the Taoist knew that he didn't get the answer he wanted. He said, I know that your attitude towards the otherworldly beings has always been to kill them all. Now that your teacher is an otherworldly being, don't you want to eradicate him? Meng Hu looked at him and said, so what if my teacher is a different race? What is a human? What is a demon? If the heart is in humanity, then it is a human. If there is evil in the heart, then it is a demon. It has nothing to do with one's origin. Moreover, my teacher has long abandoned his mortal body. Only his Dharmakaya is left in this world. He is no different from those who have cut off their mortal bodies. Also, you have said something wrong. The different races that I have killed are all scourges of humanity. All living things in the world are fundamentally the same. As long as they do not harm my Yen sect, then what does it matter to me? There are many vine demons and flower monsters outside the Taoist palace. Have I ever killed all those different races? The Taoist shook his head, sighed and said, you have been bewitched by the people of the world. His gaze was fixed on Meng Hu, but one day, you will finally understand where you belong. When he finished, he turned around, as if he was about to leave. Seeing that he was about to leave, Meng Hu said anxiously, wait. The Taoist stopped in his tracks and turned around. He said, oh? Do you have anything else to say to me? Meng Hu said seriously, remember to visit me often. The Taoist was silent for a long time. The surrounding scenery suddenly shattered. Meng Hu's body shook and he suddenly woke up from his meditation. He was still sitting in the main hall, but Zhang Chan was standing not far away. He hurriedly stood up and bowed. He said, teacher, why are you here? Zhang Chan scolded him and said, you are too careless. When you are sitting in meditation, there is no one to protect you. You are lucky that I came here. If your enemy came, wouldn't you have already paid the debt? Meng Hu nodded and said that he would not dare to do it again. Seeing that he had learned a lesson, Zhang Chan nodded in satisfaction. Then, he turned into a rainbow and floated away. It was obvious that he did not come here for Meng Hu, but to protect him. Meng Hu wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, he snorted and threw the matter just now to the back of his mind. He moved his feet lightly and walked toward his cave abode. After Zhang Yan pushed all the creation spirits to enter the world, he sent a fated person to guide each of them. Most of them agreed to teach like Meng Hu, but it was not all smooth sailing. In the land of creation under Chenju's rule, the spirit of creation had gained enlightenment for no reason and realized that he was born extraordinary. If it was left alone, it might connect with the innate spirit after it cultivated to a certain level. However, it obviously did not have a chance. Zhang Yan's Weili shrouded this place. Just now, when it had such a thought, its consciousness was easily crushed and sent to reincarnation. If it was still like this after reincarnation, then what awaited it would be the next reincarnation until its original self gave in. Only then would it not repeat the same mistake. Zhang Yan thought that the creation spirit that was trapped outside the calamity power might not be the land of creation that had collapsed into an unknown number of land of creation. Instead, it came from these spirits that were of the same origin as him. In fact, if there was a way to kill all of them, he might be able to stop it from entering the world. But if he really wanted to find such a technique, he wouldn't do it. It was precisely because of the spirit of creation that the path towards the source of the Grand Tao could be traced. Since the great benefactors had created this situation, then why should he let them down? However, compared to him, Wei Ming's method was much more ruthless. After this Vedanta returned to the land of creation, he also pushed the creation spirit into the world. However, in order to prevent it from being used by the creation spirit that had yet to return, he did not want any additional variables to appear in his own land of creation. Therefore, every time the spirit reincarnated, he would be killed by the Weili, and then reincarnated again. This cycle would continue. As such, the spirit was destined to never truly fall into the world. Under their respective efforts, any land of creation that they saw in the world of creation would not allow the creation spirit to remain dormant. They would try to push it into the world. However, outside of the world of creation, the entangled Weili would not stop because of the two's actions. Another 100 years passed, and more Weili fell into the world of creation. Then the world began to flicker. This was a sign that another Vedanta was about to return. Zhang Yan tried to calculate for a while, wanting to see who this person was. However, he found that the wisp of qi that was most likely to return was somewhat unfamiliar. It was obviously not something that he knew or saw in the past. At the same time, he prepared to bear the burden of the calamity power to prevent everything from collapsing when this person returned. However, as he continued to calculate, and the increasingly agitated Weili, he found that something was wrong. His eyes flickered slightly. This time, it was not just one Weili that returned, but two. Chapter 2197. When Zhang Yan sensed that there were two people who returned this time, he came out of Busushan and stared at the unpredictable place shrouded by the tribulation power. The Vedanta each controlled Pauline, and each had their own Tao. There was a fixed number of them. From the previous clues and his own deduction, there were about a dozen of them. If the four great ancestors or the owner of the devil treasury appeared, he would be able to recognize them immediately because of their past involvement. If it was people like Ji Zhuang and the one who transmitted his thoughts, it would not be difficult to recognize them if he returned. Other than these few, there were not many Vedanta left. However, he sensed the second force that he had not discovered just now and found it unfamiliar. Suddenly, there was a mighty force floating around him. Wei Ming appeared beside him and said with a solemn expression, "Fellow Taoist, two fellow Taoists have returned to Zhu. If they can return successfully, I hope you can work with me to dissolve the tribulation power to prevent Zhu Yu from collapsing." Now, he paid more attention to Zhu Yu than Zhang Yan because the land of creation that he occupied could not survive the collision of the tribulation power. The only one that could not be shaken was Busushan. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I will not sit by and watch Zhu Yu collapse." Once the Vedanta really returned, someone would be needed to dissolve the tribulation power. Unless, according to what Wei Ming said, someone else would be responsible for the tribulation power. Now that there was no one, they could only prevent this from happening. Other than that, the two of them still had their own Weili ripples that would affect Zhu Yu. This would need to be resolved with Pauline. If it really did not work, they would need to fill in the gaps. Both of them looked at the place where the force was revealed. In the silence, the turmoil of Zhu Yu did not stop. This was just a sign of the arrival of the Vedanta Weili. Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. He could feel that the two forces seemed to have collided with the tribulation power. To be precise, they were blocked by the tribulation power. This was like a river that had crashed into a dam and could not move forward. His and Wei Ming's expressions did not change. This situation was also within expectations. Although the two forces had the potential to enter the world, Due to many reasons, they might not be able to easily return to the world. Now, the power of the great virtue could easily leak out because of the collision of the two creation Pauline flowers, which caused the void to crack. However, this did not mean that the tribulation power did not exist. If the Vedanta wanted to return, they had to avoid this power or let someone else bear it. It seemed that Wei Ming used the latter method. In reality, if there were no external forces or peer influences, this method was the easiest way to return, because the Wei had already returned a step earlier. These two Vedanta probably didn't have many Wei in the present world before, so they didn't have much power to guide them. Therefore, it wasn't that easy for them to break through the obstruction of the tribulation power. This result was quite normal. In reality, even a great virtue like Wei Ming, who had returned almost completely, still had a portion of his strength trapped by the tribulation force. Thus, a portion of his memories were still missing. If the two returned Wei could not completely get rid of the tribulation power, then in the end, only a portion of the power would fall. However, this was also good. Because if it wasn't the whole body that returned, but only a portion of the power, then at most, it would be like Yao Han and Ji Zhuang back then, with the strength of a first or second stage spirit refinement cultivator. This way, whether it was the Wei or the karma tribulation power, it wouldn't be enough to shake the world. It must be known that if he and Wei Ming used the creation Pauline to bear the tribulation power, it couldn't be moved out again. If a bit of it leaked out, it would cause the world to always be lacking a bit. They could only slowly wear it down with the Wei in the future. But if this didn't happen, it would save them a lot of trouble. Moreover, after these fellow Taoists returned, they would definitely find their original creation Pauline. If they came back with insufficient strength, then it would be much easier for him to borrow the opportunity. After one of the powers realized that it couldn't break through, it only revealed a bit of its power and came to the world, and most of its power was retracted. Wei Ming nodded and said, "This is also a wise move." There was such a bit of power in the void. Although it was still controlled by the tribulation power, if he used the method he used before, he could guide the people in the present world to find a way to become spirit refinement. When they opened the limit of the Great Path and went to the Great Path Galaxy, he could entrust the tribulation power to them and escape. Although the hope of this method was slightly slim, there was always a chance. However, the other powers still didn't give up. It was obvious that it didn't want to miss this opportunity. It still stubbornly rushed against the tribulation power barrier, and the extremely small Wei that originally stayed in the void was also mobilized. Zhang Yan watched for a moment, but he saw the true intention of this person. This was to find the creation Pauline that originally belonged to him, and use this thing as the foundation of his own world. If he succeeded, he could use this thing to return to the world. However, the premise of this was that this person could accomplish this before the tribulation powers sealed it back. Otherwise, it would be better for the previous person to first put some power into the world, and then slowly plan to continue. After persisting for a long time, the Wei slowly retreated under the obstruction of the tribulation power, and it seemed that there was little hope of it returning. However, at this moment, the two suddenly saw a creation Pauline jump out of the void, and one of the Wei immediately had the foundation of his world, and its power that was originally blocked by the tribulation power gradually broke through. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. It wasn't that he hadn't looked for the creation Pauline, even with his old master's chi and the Pauline lotus petal, it wasn't easy. This person Wei had only drifted among the world for a while, and he had found it. It was really luck. As the Wei was about to land, the tremors of the world became unusually intense. At this moment, Wei Ming bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "Last time, when I returned to the world, it was you who took my tribulation power and dissolved it. I owe you for that. This time, since only one of you has returned, I'll take care of it." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow." Wei Ming took the initiative to step forward and held the creation Pauline in his hand, collecting all the tribulation power into it. The throbbing of the world immediately calmed down. At the same time, the Wei finally landed among the world, and then it gathered together. At this moment, it seemed like everything had disappeared, but in the blink of an eye, a Taoist walked out of the void. He stretched out his hand and held a Pauline in his hand, and he entrusted his surging Whaley into it. As for the other Whaley, it didn't have such luck. Most of its power was repelled by the tribulation power, and it was obvious that it would end up with a broken body. It could only be cultivated in the future. After the Taoist returned, he first looked at Wei Ming, then bowed and said with a smile, "Greetings, fellow." Wei Ming returned the greeting and said, "Forgive me for not remembering your name." The Taoist smiled and said, "At the beginning of the primordial chaos, the mind is naturally a wonderful sense. I am Xiang Ju." He turned to look at Zhang Yan and said, "May I know how to address you, fellow?" Wei Ming said, "This is fellow Taoist Xin Yuan." Xiang Ju then turned around and exchanged greetings with Zhang Yan. At this moment, Wei Ming tried to ask, "Fellow Taoist Xiang Ju, you've gotten rid of a lot of tribulation power this time. Do you remember the reason why the creation essence broke?" The Taoist revealed a pondering expression and slowly shook his head. "The matter of the creation essence. I only remember that I wanted to use it to understand the Tao, but what happened after that was blurry. I think it was lost in the tribulation power." He then looked at Wei Ming and smiled. "Fellow Taoist seems to have forgotten about this too." "It's fine if you forget about these things, but I'm afraid that it will delay your own Tao fruit. That's not appropriate." Wei Ming didn't reply, nor did he mention the creation spirit. He couldn't tell if the other party was the creation spirit, so he had to be cautious of this person. Moreover, from the mention of his own fruit of Tao, it was clear that he was a person who was obsessed with the great Tao. In that case, even if he was just a fellow Taoist, he would definitely compete with him for the land of creation and the spirit of creation. No matter how many creation lands there were, they were still limited. Although he hadn't found many yet, there were originally 2 of them. Now that there was one more, it would undoubtedly hinder his Tao path. Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent, and he didn't say a word. He definitely had to be cautious of the creation spirit. Before he was sure whether it was Wei Ming or this Taoist Xiang Ju, he wouldn't let his guard down. Xiang Ju seemed to have sensed the cold attitude of the 2, but he just smiled, bowed to them, and disappeared. Wei Ming saw him leave and said to Zhang Yan, "I'll go back and wear down the tribulation power. If there's an enemy coming, I hope you can help." Zhang Yan smiled. So this was the reason why Wei Ming proposed to take the initiative to collect the tribulation power. The 2 of them formed a kind of alliance, but he didn't care. He could feel that the Whaley of Xiang Ju was stronger than Wei Ming. This was because the latter had returned more Whaley. If they fought for the creation lands, it wasn't impossible for them to attack Wei Ming. Originally, he didn't have the mind to care about the fights between others. However, if Xiang Ju was the spirit of creation, if it easily swallowed Wei Ming, then its power would become even greater. Therefore, before he had a way to determine its identity, he had to prevent this from happening. So he said, "Don't worry, Taoist. I think that with the threat of the creation spirit, it's better to avoid fights between people of the same generation." When Wei Ming heard his reply, he felt reassured. After bowing, he said goodbye and left first. After Xiang Ju left the 2 of them, he made some calculations in his heart. He also sensed that a portion of the spirits formed from the creation chi was missing. After the creation essence was shattered, the scattered places of creation were the foundation of enlightenment. This was because most of these spirits came from the present world that was attached to the places of creation. So he also understood why Wei Ming's attitude towards him was so cold. They were opponents in the pursuit of Tao. It was just that the creation lands had not fully appeared, so there was no need to have a conflict because of Wei Ming. But it was hard to say what would happen in the future. He thought for a while and entered the divine will. In just a moment, the figure of the purple-robed Taoist appeared. He seemed to be surprised as well. For some reason, when his divine will arrived here, he cautiously bowed to Xiang Ju and said, "Greetings, Taoist friend." After seeing him, Xiang Ju's smile disappeared. Instead, he seemed a bit cold and distant. He said, "Although you don't know me, I know the person behind you. I owe him a favor for being able to come back. What do you want to do? You can tell me. If it's within my power, I will help you." Chapter 2198. When the purple-robed Taoist heard Xiang Ju's words, a smile appeared on his face, but he was calculating in his heart. Xiangju saw him and the master behind him as the same person, but in reality, he was not anyone's vassal. Everything he did was based on his own interests, and he did not listen to anyone's orders. Just like his predecessor, he believed that he was a Dada until he was exposed by Zhang Yan. Just now, because of the latter's Weili oppression, his own body had dissipated. Now that he was a Weili body, he still had a part of his predecessor's memory, but at the same time, he also recognized where he came from. Even so, it did not mean that he was completely in line with the master behind him. This was due to the influence of the robbery power, and at the same time, it was inevitable after the consciousness became independent. However, he also knew that although he had a body of Weili, and also controlled an incomplete creation Pauline, he could not compare to a true Dada, so he had to accept Xiangju's goodwill. Since the other party thought that what he wanted was what he wanted, then he could use this name to act. After thinking about it, he said, "Among everything, the most important place is undoubtedly the land of creation." Xiangju waved his sleeve, stopping him from continuing. "Just now, I see that most of these places are in the hands of Xianyuan and Weiming. If you want me to have a conflict with these two, then don't say anything more." The purple-robed Taoist smiled and said, "I don't want you to do that, but there are many spirits in the land of creation. They are of the same origin as me. However, I noticed that Xianyuan and Weiming have pushed these spirits into the world. They are either using them or blocking the reincarnation door. I hope that you can control them. I don't expect you to be free, but I hope that you won't be easily won over by the two of them." Xiangju weighed the pros and cons. This seemed to be a small matter, but if he interfered, he could not avoid conflict with Zhang Yan and Weiming. However, since the other party did not want a real result, he might as well do them a favor, so he said, "I will pay attention to this matter, and if there is a chance, I will do as you wish." The purple-robed Taoist cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Taoist." Immediately after, his figure dissipated and his divine intent retreated. Xiangju also retreated from the divine will. Although he was only able to enter the world with the help of the spirit of creation, he had a clear understanding of this person. He knew that this person was ultimately the enemy of Dada, but he was not in a hurry to cut off the connection between the two. Instead, he took the initiative to contact this person. This was also because he had his own considerations. Because no matter how powerful the spirit of creation was, as long as it didn't return, there was nothing for him to fear. Instead, he could use the excuse of owing it a favor and borrow its strength to do some things. Now that he had some understanding of the situation, he naturally had a lot of fear towards Zhang Yan, who had the most land of fortune. On the contrary, Weiming was much weaker in comparison. No matter from which aspect, the latter was obviously easier to approach and rope in than the former. After some careful calculations, he realized that it would be very difficult for him to compete with the two of them for the land of fortune, and it would be even more difficult when more people arrived. After thinking about it for a while, he came up with an idea to break the situation. Thus, he used his divine will to avoid Zhang Yan and invite Weiming to have a talk. But after trying, he found that Weiming did not respond at all. He thought about it and couldn't help but laugh. He thought that Weiming was afraid of Zhang Yan, or that there was some agreement between the two of them, so it was not willing to contact in private. Since this was the case, there was no harm in bringing this matter out in the open. Visiting once would not necessarily arouse Zhang Yan's hostility. With a thought, he arrived at the land of fortune where Weiming was and greeted him outside. Weiming was not surprised to see him. He had long expected that Xiangju would come to find him after realizing that the path of seeking Tao was difficult. This was because Zhang Yan had the most land of fortune, and at the same time, he had Bushutian in his hands. He was definitely the stronger party, while Xiangju seemed to be on the weaker side. Xiangju would definitely find him. With a thought, he came out of the land of fortune. After greeting Xiangju outside, he asked why he had come. Xiangju sighed. The essence of fortune has collapsed. Although we have found a way to seek Tao, it is clear that we will have to compete with each other. The strong will become stronger and the weak will become weaker. Is this what you want to see? Weiming was surprised. Xiangju's words were not out of his expectations. He said, "It seems that you want to join forces with me?" Xiangju said, "Yes. Wei Ming said indifferently, I will have to disappoint you. I will not join forces with you. Xiang Ju was rejected, but he was not disappointed. Instead, he laughed. Do you think that I want to join forces with you to deal with Xianyuan? Wei Ming said, Is that not the case? He looked at Xiang Ju and his expression became serious. It seems that you have something else to say? Xiang Ju smiled. I will not only join forces with you, but also with Xianyuan. Wei Ming pondered over the meaning of his words and said, Fellow Taoist, could it be that you want the three of us to join forces and fight against the fellow Taoists who came later? Xiang Ju smiled and shook his head. No, I don't want to fight against anyone. I said that I want to join forces with everyone. Of course, that includes everyone. Wei Ming frowned. What do you want to say? You can say it directly. Xiang Ju's expression turned serious as he said, Right now, the places of fortune are scattered in the void. It will be extremely difficult to find them. No matter how hard we search, we won't be able to find fellow Taoist Xianyuan. Wei Ming didn't say anything about this because this was something that was obvious. However, someone like him who'd arrived a step earlier would naturally be able to seize more benefits than those who'd arrived later, unless he was able to overturn Zhang Yan. But he had experienced Zhang Yan's strength. He also had Bu Su Tian and many Weili from the lands of fortune to use. Even if he joined forces with Xiang Ju, they would not be able to do this. At this time, Xiang Ju said meaningfully, I think that if a few more fellow Taoists return, then the places of creation that each of us can control will be even more scattered, which is extremely disadvantageous for us to pursue the great Tao. Instead of competing with each other, it is better to combine all the places of creation into one. Wei Ming was startled. Combine them into one? Xiang Ju said, It is not to combine the lands of fortune. That is also difficult. Instead, we should make an agreement with those who come back later. We will take out all the lands of fortune that we can find for everyone to comprehend. This way, there will be no distinction between us, and we will all share the great Tao. We will also avoid competition. Isn't that great? Wei Ming's expression changed as he looked at Xiang Ju. It was fortunate that Xiang Ju could come up with this idea. This meant that no matter how many lands of fortune there were, as long as they were found, they would be taken out for everyone to comprehend. This would be easily accepted by those who came back later. But if some people benefited, others would suffer. He pondered for a moment, then looked up with a burning gaze. I wonder if Bu Su Tian is also in the list of people who will share the fortune with you? Xiang Ju smiled. Bu Su Tian is also a land of fortune, so it is naturally in the list. Perhaps we cannot do this now, but when more people come, we will naturally be able to do it. Wei Ming lowered his head and thought for a moment. Although he had searched in every way possible, until now he only had 2 lands of fortune in hand. This was because finding these places was like the path to Tao. The further one went, the more difficult it became. If he really agreed with Xiang Ju's suggestion, then he would only be giving 2 lands of fortune to others. This was not a big deal. Perhaps the one who would lose the most here would be Zhang Yan, but this was also beneficial to him. The reason why Xiang Ju came up with this idea was because he felt that it would be difficult to compete with Zhang Yan and Wei Ming. Moreover, he was not sure if the two had already formed an alliance. It would be too passive for him to face the two alone. Even if he found a land of fortune, if the two came to fight for it, he would be helpless. The good thing about this idea was that if another Vedanta came, as long as they were not stronger than the Weili and could easily suppress all of their peers, they would most likely agree with this idea. Wei Ming asked, What do you plan to do now? Xiang Ju said, I don't think fellow Taoist Xianyuan wants to see this happen either, so we need more fellow Taoists to agree with our wishes. Before more fellow Taoists arrive, I'd like to find another fellow Taoist. Wei Ming asked, Another Taoist? He thought of another Vedanta who fell into this world, but this one did not have a complete body, and the power he possessed could not be compared to them. Xiang Ju nodded and said, I can help him find his incomplete power, and then explain to him the greater good. I think he will understand that doing this is beneficial to me and him. Wei Ming thought carefully for a moment, then said in a low voice, If fellow Taoist wants to do this, then go ahead and do it. I won't stop you. I'll also help you cover up fellow Taoist Xianyuan, but if fellow Taoist Xianyuan discovers anything, don't blame me for not helping you. Although he was tempted, he would not easily agree to this because there was an unavoidable problem, and that was, he could not tell whether the other party was formed by the spirit of fortune or not. Because of this, he just now refused the invitation of the other party's divine will. He was afraid that he would accidentally fall into a trap. He would only truly be at ease when there were more virtuous beings in the void. Because at that time, unless the spirit of creation's body landed among all beings, it wouldn't be able to cause any trouble on its own. Xiangju was not in a hurry, and he did not want to persuade Wei Ming in one go. At least for now, it was not a wise move to go against Zhang Yan, so it was better to lie low. Of course, he had to find a place of fortune as well. In this way, he would at least have a place to rely on. If he were to come into conflict with Zhang Yan and Wei Ming, then he wouldn't be casually taken advantage of by them. He said a few more words to Wei Ming, then said goodbye and left. He did not immediately go to find the other fallen Vedanta. First of all, this person was not that important at the moment, and second, he also knew that his every move was under Zhang Yan's watch. Just now, he had just talked to Wei Ming, and now he immediately went to find another person. No matter how he looked at it, there was something wrong, so he decided to slow down, so as not to attract too much attention from Zhang Yan. Chapter 2199. Zhang Yan had indeed seen all of Xiangju's actions. He did not need to think too much to know that it was directed at him. Now that he controlled Busu Tian and the most places of creation, this was a contradiction. As long as the Vedanta had the intention to pursue the great Tao, they would definitely have their eyes on this place. Therefore, this place could not be avoided. Apart from this person, there was another person who was starting to get restless. He looked at the purple-robed Taoist and found that he did not stop because of the return of one or two Vedanta. Instead, he continued to attract the Weili. However, this was only a small matter. Previously, he had clearly felt that there was something strange about this person. He pondered for a moment. Perhaps this person was conspiring something with someone's divine will. However, he was not afraid of this and was even looking forward to the upcoming battle. This was because only by fighting could one obtain what they wanted. Only by fighting with the Vedanta could they seize the chi from the creation Pauline in the hands of the younger generation and pave the way for the perfect body of strength path. However, there were actually two people who returned to the myriad beings. The other person's power was not complete, but he would not ignore it. No matter what, the other person's power came from the Vedanta, so it was difficult to know what they knew. Just like back then, if Yao Han ancestor had not caused Pauline to collide and caused the void to break, the subsequent events would not have happened. Or rather, it would have happened much later. In addition, this person had something he needed, so he took it before the Vedanta's power returned. With a single thought, his great power circulated and he instantly found the person's whereabouts. He then sent an avatar out of Busu Tian and instantly arrived at a certain place. There was a Taoist sitting peacefully in the empty world here, and when he saw Zhang Yan arrive, he was slightly surprised. He stood up, cupped his fists, and said, "Where have you come from, fellow Taoist?" Zhang Yan glanced at this person. Although he was a part of the Vedanta, he was not the Vedanta himself. Therefore, whether it was his speech or temperament, he could not be compared to when he was complete. Disregarding his background, he could be seen as a first-stage spirit refinement cultivator. He said, "How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" The Taoist said, "You can call me Zhilian. This is not my Taoist name, but the name of my body." Zhang Yan could understand. Not only was this person not in his entire body, but the power he returned was too weak, so he couldn't be called Dada. He said, "I've come to find you today because I want to discuss something with you." Zhilian said, "Please speak, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, you must have returned because you want to guide your entire body into everything, in order to return to your original state. Fellow Taoist, if you only rely on yourself, it will be very difficult. The foundation of stability here lies in Pauline's good fortune. With this item, you can continue to guide your power back. I can help fellow Taoist here." Zhilian spoke cautiously, "What do you need me to do?" It was good that a great virtue was willing to help, but it would not be without reason. However, he did not feel that he could not repay this favor. Although his strength was weak now, once he recovered his great virtue ability, he would be on equal footing with the other party. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't need you to do anything as long as you can lend me a lotus petal." Jilian was surprised and said, "That's all?" Zhang Yan nodded and smiled, "That's all." Jilian thought about it for a moment. Even if he managed to obtain the Bao Lian lotus now, it would be impossible for him to use it completely due to his own limitations. Taking away one petal wouldn't be a big deal. Once he recovered his strength, with his status as the master, he could retrieve the petal at any time. No matter how strong Zhang Yanwei was, he wouldn't be able to stop him. Thinking about this, he said, "If that's the case, then I'll leave it to fellow Taoist." As he spoke, he had already sent out a strand of his qi. Zhang Yan kept this strand of qi, raised his hand and took out his own good fortune Pauline. Pauline could be attracted to each other, and with the master's qi, with his Weili, it was not difficult to find Pauline's whereabouts. He only needed to sense it slightly and it was already enough. He stretched out his hand and immediately took out another Pauline from nothingness. He plucked a lotus petal and at the same time, took away a strand of qi. After obtaining this qi, even if this lotus petal was taken back in the future, it would still be the same. The reason why he used this item as an excuse was because when Ji Lian recovered his whole body, it would not be difficult for him to know what was happening now. He only took the lotus petal and did not directly take Pauline's qi, so people would not be able to deduce what he was going to do. After obtaining the lotus petal, he gently pushed Pauline and sent it to Ji Lian. Ji Lian hurriedly took it, but when the Pauline fell into his hands, the originally bright golden light instantly dimmed, and then the lotus petal also fell down one by one, disappearing in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, it became extremely broken. He sighed, but also understood that he did not have enough power to take Pauline's Weili, but it was still better than nothing. After putting this item into his divine will, he bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "Thank you, Taoist friend." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't need to thank me, Taoist friend. I also took something, and since I have already fulfilled my promise, I will take my leave now." Helping someone to take Pauline, although he also took Pauline's qi, it could lead to one result, and that was, this person would recover his Weili much earlier. However, because Ji Lian's strength this time was too little, even if he obtained Pauline, there would probably be great virtue trying to return before he could succeed, so it did not matter if he had one more person or one less person. After bowing, he dispersed the doppelganger and turned his consciousness back to his original body. While searching for the land of creation, Xiang Ju also paid attention to the spirits of creation. He also wanted to add some trouble to Zhang Yan and distract his attention. However, this matter could not be done too obviously, otherwise, if it attracted Zhang Yan directly to his door, it would not be what he wanted. After looking around, he could not see the situation in Busha Heaven clearly, he could only see the Mirror Lake and a few other places. However, the spirits of creation in many of the land of creation might be because the boundary they were in was not good, so in his opinion, they were weak and there was no need to affect them. On the contrary, there was a spirit of creation in the Mirror Lake, which was slightly interesting and had some status, so it was worth him to make a move to shake its will. However, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would notice, so he did not dare to do it too obviously. After thinking for a while, he guided a wisp of divine will in, and then immediately cut it off. This divine will was not too Weili. As long as a great virtue noticed it, it would immediately dissipate, but it was different for the cultivators of the lower realms. If their will was not strong enough, they would be controlled by it. Yinjiao headquarters. Meng, who leaned on a big rock, bored and teased a little leopard cat. Others needed to cultivate in seclusion, but he could improve by just meditating. Now that Zhang Chan wanted him to improve his state of mind and not be too radical in cultivation, he also relaxed a little, touring the mountains and rivers all day, very happy. At this moment, he used his consciousness to casually pull a straw and swayed it nimbly, sometimes floating up, sometimes diving down, sometimes shuttling back and forth, like a swimming fish. The little leopard cat also jumped here and there, never tired of it. From time to time, disciples of Yanjiao passed by under the rock, and when they saw him here, they quickly stopped and respectfully saluted. Each time, Meng Hu would casually wave his hand as a form of greeting. Then, he would spread his arms and legs and spread them out on the big rock. Looking up at the sky, he allowed the little raccoon to jump on his belly and play around. In his mind, he was thinking about where to go next. In a flash, astral winds swirled around his body, and with a rumble, broke through the atmosphere, and was already high up in the sky. Below him was a surging sea of clouds. He hugged the little leopard cat, lay down on the clouds again, and floated away. He originally wanted to sit here and watch the wind and clouds, but unknowingly he felt his mind become blurry. Suddenly, a green leaf floated over from above, but before it could fall on his head, it was torn apart by the astral chi on his body. He abruptly sobered up as well, and he looked at his surroundings. He noticed that he wasn't in the sky any longer, and he was in a world filled with the singing of birds and the fragrance of flowers instead. There was an immortal mountain standing towering not too far away in front of him, and immortal clouds drifted above the peak of the mountain. He muttered, "Changed a trick?" Then he revealed a trace of excitement. That person's words last time were very pleasant to hear. Astral winds rose under his feet, and he went up the mountain peak. In less than 10 breaths, he reached the top of the mountain, only to see that the place was surrounded by clouds, and peach blossoms were everywhere. An immortal like Daoran sat there, holding a horsetail whisk in his hand, and smiled amiably at him, saying, "Little friend, why are you late?" Meng Hu's eyes widened, and he said in surprise, "I'm actually late?" He revealed a trace of disappointment, turned around, and walked down the mountain. "Then I'm leaving." Seeing that he seemed to really want to leave, Daoran couldn't help but raise his eyebrows a few times, and reached out to stop him, saying, "Don't go." When Meng Hu stopped and turned around, he withdrew his hand, stroked his beard, and said with a smile, "Actually, you're not late. Come, sit closer." Hearing him say so, Meng Hu walked back, and as he walked, he muttered, "I said I wasn't late, you must have come early." That Doran's eyelids twitched, and when Meng Hu came to sit in front of him, he said amiably, "Little friend, do you know where this is?" Meng Hu said solemnly, "My master said, the world is as big as the heart. I think this is in my heart." That Daoran was surprised, and then revealed a look of admiration and said with a nod, "Not bad, your aptitude and comprehension are top-notch, not something ordinary people can compare with. Your root is also formed by nature, so your heart is also far better than ordinary people." Speaking up to this point, he suddenly couldn't continue, because Meng Hu's eyes were wide open, and he looked as if he had seen through all his secrets. He felt that it was inappropriate to continue like this, and quickly stopped and said, "Do you know why your family is like this?" Meng Hu raised his head and said with his chest puffed out, "That's naturally because I was born extraordinary. I read the Taoist books, and it says that innate saints dare to compete for the first place in all things, and can understand everything in the world. I think they're talking about me." That Daoran slightly paused, and the horsetail whisk in his hand unconsciously lifted twice. After a while, he forced himself to say, "You're right, I can tell you that you're actually the reincarnation of the innate spirit of creation. It's just that you've been blinded by the filth of the world, and you don't recognize yourself. Since you've come here today, you should quickly wake up, find your true self, and complete yourself." Chapter 2200. Towards the end of Doran's words, his booming voice reverberated throughout the mountains, and there was even a faint rumble of thunder in the clouds. On the summit of the mountain, the aura of heaven and earth pressed down together. This was like a head-on blow that would cause an ordinary person's heart and body to tremble and their spirit to be seized. However, Meng Hu just sat there and looked at him as if he didn't feel anything, and only occasionally blinked a few times. That Daoran frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "You already knew your identity?" Meng Hu shook his head repeatedly and revealed a somewhat modest expression. He said, "This is the first time I've heard of this spirit of creation. May I ask, Elder Daoran, what exactly is this spirit of creation?" "So you don't know? Ignorance is bliss. This is his mind." If his heart doesn't move, others can't do anything about it. It's a waste of my efforts. Thoughts spun in Doran's mind, but he used simple words to explain the origin of the spirit of creation. Meng Hu was stunned when he heard it, but in the end he rolled to his feet and bowed respectfully to Doran. Doran stroked his beard and said, "Did you comprehend something?" Meng Hu said with incomparable sincerity, "Originally, I thought that my family was already very powerful. After listening to Elder Doran's words, only then did I realize that I was narrow-minded and not broad-minded enough, but I've learned a lesson. In the future, I will definitely change this bad habit." Doran's hand that was stroking his beard stiffened. He sighed and said, "Being narrow-minded isn't used like this? Forget it." He flicked his horsetail whisk and said, "Let me ask you, are you willing to take me as your master?" Meng Hu couldn't help but hesitate, and in the end he shook his head. Doran said with a smile, "Is it because you've already taken me as your master, so you're not willing to join another sect? You don't have to worry about this. I'm just a teacher in your dreams. I won't appear in the real world, so this isn't considered deceiving your teacher. If you're worried, you can tell your teacher about this. I'm sure he won't stop you." He was also up to no good. If Meng Hu told Zhang Chan about it, it would be best if the latter did not stop him. If he did, it would instead trigger the resistance in Meng Hu's heart. As long as he tried to guide it a few more times, he would fall into his trap sooner or later. However, Meng Hu still shook his head. Doran asked curiously, "Since you don't have such misgivings, why are you unwilling?" Meng Hu was slightly embarrassed as he said, "Elder Doran has also said that I'm the reincarnation of an innate spirit of creation. Those who want to take me as their disciple are naturally trying to benefit from my good fortune, and I'm not trying to benefit from their good fortune. How can I let others take advantage of me for nothing? Do you think I'm right, Chief Doran?" The look in Doran's eyes was clearly telling him not to take advantage of him. He clenched his horsetail whisk tightly, took a breath, and said, "You might not know my identity, Doran." Meng Hu's eyes lit up, and he said, "Could it be that Chief Doran is also a spirit of creation?" Doran frowned and firmly denied, "No." Then he saw the look of disdain in Meng Hu's eyes, and for no reason he felt a burst of anger. He took another breath and tried his best to speak in a calm tone. "You need to know Doran, am a Grand Supreme. Many people want to take me as their master, but they can't." Meng Hu was shocked, and he said, "Chief Doran, aren't you the teacher in my dreams? Could it be that there's more than one person in your dreams?" The look of disdain on his face became even heavier. Doran said indifferently, "If you miss this opportunity, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to find the Great Way again. You need to know that in this world, if you don't transcend the Great Way, it'll be difficult for you to escape from the cycle of reincarnation. You're still just a speck of dust among everything, and you can only be manipulated by others. Aren't you afraid?" Meng Hu felt wronged, and he said, "But Chief Doran also said that I'm a spirit of creation. Even if I don't find the Great Way will find me. Let me tell you, Chief Doran, previously, there were also people who came to find me like you." Doran flicked his horsetail whisk and left without looking back. Meng Hu saw his figure dissipate in the clouds, and the mountain under his feet first collapsed, and then the surrounding scenery shattered. When the whole world collapsed, he suddenly woke up and realized that he was still in the sky. But at this time, the little raccoon had climbed above his head. He wanted to reach out and grab it, but he changed his mind and said, "Forget it, I'll let you take advantage of me." He stood up, and with a swing of his mana, a strong wind overflowed, breaking through the atmosphere, and flew towards the Taoist palace where Zhang Chan was. At this time, Xiangju suddenly felt a throbbing in his heart, as if the strand of divine will he had separated from himself had a result. Because he had deliberately cut off the connection, there was no way for him to directly know the result, so he tried to calculate it, and found that this time he did not succeed, and could not shake the will of the spirit of creation in the mirror lake. This made him a little surprised. The strand of divine will he used could affect the mind, and draw out the evil thoughts in the depths of people's hearts. It should have been successful in dealing with people of the lower realm, but it still did not succeed. He thought that the spirit might have attracted a lot of attention from Zhang Yan, so it did not succeed. After thinking about it, he did not pay much attention to it. This kind of thing could be done at any time, as long as it was not discovered by Zhang Yan. If it did not work this time, then it would be the next time, and if there was no more chance, then he would completely give up, and it would not affect anything. He turned to look into the silence, and after some searching, he still could not find the place of creation, but he found a few fragments of creation, which was better than nothing. At this moment, he also found that in addition to the place of creation, if he wanted to pursue the perfection of the great path, he also needed to complete the spirit. This would have to pass down his own impartation of way, in hopes that these creatures would recognize his way. Although the main world also had the chi of creation that flowed in it, to him, life and death happened in an instant, so there was no need for him to care about it. When there was no place of creation, the main world that was attached to the creation fragment was the only place he could choose to pass down his Tao arts. After being immersed in this for a long time, when the silence seemed to have calmed down, he felt that it was time to try to get in touch with another fellow Taoist who had joined Zhuyu with him. So with a change of spirit, he tried to connect with that person. After Jillian received help from Zhang Yan, he had been gathering his own strength. Just as he was working hard, he suddenly felt a wave of spirit, and he could feel that it was Taoist Xiangju opposite him. He originally wanted to refuse, but in the current situation he could not afford to offend the other party, so after thinking about it, he still accepted it. Xiangju appeared, bowed and said, "I am Xiangju, fellow Taoist." Jillian hurriedly returned the greeting and said his name. Xiangju said, "I have returned to Zhuyu with fellow Taoist, and I should have visited more often, but I was delayed by some matters before, so now I have the time to visit." Jillian said, "I have come here with only a broken body, I have made a fool of myself." Xiangju smiled. "Although fellow Taoist has returned to Zhuyu, because your own Weili is weak, you have yet to find Pauline. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to guide the power of the true body, right?" Jillian furrowed his brows. Out of caution, he had intentionally kept the Bao Lotus within his divine decree. This way, as long as an outsider did not look carefully, they would not be able to detect his actions. Without batting an eyelid, he asked, "May I know why you are asking about this?" Xiangju said seriously, "I have come today for this matter. I can help fellow Taoist find Pauline, so that fellow Taoist can recover your body as soon as possible." When Jillian heard this, not only did he not think it was a good thing, he sighed instead. He did not know why two virtuous virtues had come to him, and it seemed like they wanted to help him. He felt that he was probably involved in a dispute between two virtuous virtues, but he did not want to easily offend either side, so he carefully said, "Why did fellow Taoist come to help me for no reason?" Xiangju smiled, "Don't worry, fellow Taoist. We value fellow Taoist's body, not the fellow Taoist in front of us. If we succeed, fellow Taoist will owe me a favor." If Zhang Yan had not come to find him before, Jillian would have been willing to accept this favor, but it was different now. He thought about it and decided to tell the truth. He said, "Fellow Taoist, I thank you for your kindness, but I have already retrieved Pauline with fellow Taoist Xuanyuan's help, so there is no need to trouble fellow Taoist with this matter." Xiangju was also startled. "Oh, fellow Taoist Xuanyuan has come to find fellow Taoist?" With a thought, Jillian pulled out Creation Pauline, saying, "This item is what fellow Taoist Xuanyuan helped me find." Xiangju could not help but think. He had taken the initiative to help Jillian because he was on the weaker side, so he had to find more helpers. He speculated that Zhang Yan's purpose in doing this was to find an ally, or perhaps he had foreseen something, so he broke up their alliance in advance. However, Jillian could not be of much use now, so it did not matter even if he was gone. When another fellow Taoist arrived, he believed that they could join forces to force Zhang Yan to make concessions. Even if they could not obtain Busushan, they could force him to share the rest of the creation lands. Moreover, Jillian had obtained Pauline, which was in line with his original intention of coming here. It would save him a lot of effort, and when he returned to his original self, he would no longer have such an idea. At that time, he might even have another helper to threaten Zhang Yan. He smiled, saying, "So fellow Taoist Xuanyuan has already been here. It seems I have done something unnecessary. Then I wish fellow Taoist Jillian the best to retrieve Weili." I will not disturb you any longer. He cupped his hands and bowed before taking his leave. Jillian pondered for a while. He knew that things were not so simple. He looked at the Pauline in his hand. After all, he had received a favor from Zhang Yan previously. He felt that he could not return the favor with just one lotus petal. He sighed and sent a strand of divine will to Busushin. Then, he closed the world calming technique and once again entered meditation. At the same time, Zhang Yan withdrew his divine will and knew what Xiangju was doing. He only smiled faintly. He was not afraid of Xiangju stirring up trouble behind his back. If he dared to directly compete with him, he would welcome him with open arms. Now that he was only doing this, it showed that he did not have the confidence to compete with him directly. However, even though he was waiting for an opportunity and temporarily lay dormant, it didn't mean that he would turn a blind eye to this and watch from the sidelines. He raised his finger and pointed out, and he placed the Tao inheritance of Yen school in the world that was attached to the few fragments of fortune that were attached to Xiangju. This was for the sake of fighting against the Tao art that was passed down by that person. If Xiangju endured and did not make a move, then he would have the right to find a place for the disciples of Yen sect to train. If he took the initiative to destroy his teachings, then as long as the time was right, he could use this as an excuse to attack him. Chapter 2201. After Zhang Yan's Weili was sent into the present world under Xiangju's rule, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He examined it and his expression darkened. In those present worlds, other than the sect that he had passed on, there was now another sect that had appeared out of nowhere. This was obviously brought about by Zhang Yan's Weili. Moreover, there was no lack of cultivators with profound cultivation. They should be the disciples that were originally in a place of fortune under Zhang Yan's rule. Just now, the Tao teachings that he had passed down were still in the initial stage. Their foundation was too shallow and weak. They were not a match for Zhang Yan's disciples at all. It seemed that it would not take long before they were all killed, and then this sect of Tao teachings would take over all the present worlds under his rule. At this moment, if he wanted to stop it, he would have to directly use his will to raise the cultivation and magical power of his followers, or simply create a few almighty beings. Then, he would be able to easily wipe out this generation. However, this would be mixed with his own great power, and from then on, it would be impossible for the spirits to return to him. However, he hesitated for a moment and did not do so. This was because there was no meaning in doing so other than to vent his anger. If he could kill these people, Zhang Yan could also resurrect them. Moreover, if this was repeated, then both sides would have the intention of going against each other. In the end, it might lead to a Weili collision between both sides. He did not want to take this step. He thought about it and understood that this was very likely a warning from Zhang Yan. Therefore, the best thing to do now was to simply endure it, pretend that he did not see it, and not make any response. He thought in his heart, "Looks like I have to find a place of fortune as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if I pass down my Tao teachings, once this person's Weili arrives, he will be able to destroy my arrangements." The reason why Zhang Yan was able to capture him so easily was because these present realms were attached to the creation fragment and could not resist the power of Dada. If they could find a land of creation and have a boundary that they could rely on, then they could fuse with their Weili. In this way, Zhang Yan's power would not be able to break in so easily. Of course, if Zhang Yan was determined to take action, it would be useless. However, he believed that Wei Ming was sitting on two places of fortune. If he only found one place of fortune and didn't want more, Zhang Yan didn't need to do this. When Zhang Yan saw that Zhu Xiang did not respond and allowed his teachings to spread in the world under his rule, he knew that Zhu Xiang had retreated. He smiled faintly. There was another reason why he was so against Xiangju, besides the fact that Xiangju was secretly causing trouble everywhere. When Xiangju returned, he easily found Creation Pauline. He didn't notice anything strange and only felt that this person was quite lucky. However, when he thought about it later, he felt that things weren't so simple. In addition, the purple-clothed Taoist might have communicated with him. Even if this person wasn't borrowed by the spirit of creation, there might be some collusion between them. If this was the case, this person would definitely cause some trouble later. However, it wasn't the time to make a move yet. He flicked his sleeve and 5 strands of qi immediately floated out in front of him. These were the qi from creation Pauline. On the surface, they looked the same, but if one looked closely, one could see that they were different. According to his previous deduction, if he wanted to complete the strength path body, he needed to fuse all of Pauline's qi into one place. Only then could he find the last strand of power. However, when these 5 strands of qi were in his hand, he unexpectedly saw a certain change. He calculated for a while. Although he couldn't touch this change for the time being, if he could get a few more strands of creation Pauline's qi, it might not be difficult to see. This undoubtedly meant that there was a layer of change in Pauline before reaching the last strand of power. This was actually not a bad thing, but a good thing. This meant that the level of Pauline's power was progressive. When several Pauline flowers were gathered in one place, they could already exert some kind of power. Then when all of Pauline's qi were gathered, this power would be strengthened to the extreme, and this would affect the unpredictable power that he speculated existed side by side with the essence of creation. If he could master this power, it wouldn't be difficult to open up everything and reshape the world. The level of power couldn't be increased in one go. If there was a transition, it would reduce the difficulty of climbing up. More importantly, this level of power was already in front of him. As long as he was willing, he could obtain it without much effort. The 5 strands of Pauline's power was still lacking, but it was only a little. Wei Ming and Xiang Jue still had 2 Pauline flowers in their hands, which was enough for him to complete this task. He thought that he could first take 1 strand from Xiang Jue's hand. If it wasn't enough, he could try to borrow more from Wei Ming. Thus, with a turn of his mind, he kept the 5 strands of qi. At this moment, he seemed to have noticed something and turned to look at a certain place in Bushutian. There was a qi that was constantly rising, and the source came from where Azure Saint was stationed. It looked like he was about to reach the 2nd realm. He glanced again. In fact, not only Azure Saint, but cultivators like Xin Chang and Zhan Yuan who pursued their own Dao also had different degrees of improvement in their cultivation. He thought about it and understood the crux of this matter. When he achieved Dada, there were consecutive clashes between the Weili and the return of Dada. The Weili was even more turbulent. In this kind of mana fluctuation, Azure Saint and the others should have seen a lot of the mysteries of the upper realm, which was why their cultivation had improved. Moreover, it was not like when he was in the 2nd realm. There were already Dada among the Zhuyu, and he was in Bushutian. The others could learn from him, and the road to the upper realm did not seem to be that difficult. However, he knew that there was still a possibility for him to reach the 2nd-degree realm, but there wasn't much hope for him to advance any further. Because if one didn't have the body of strength as the foundation of the world, then one must have a creation Pauline flower in hand, otherwise it would be difficult to achieve Dada. Although there must be Paulines scattered in the void, it was not easy for him to find it, let alone the others. Taking a step back, even if one really found a Pauline flower in hand and successfully opened the limit of the Tao, if there were Dada like Wei Ming who disturbed them in the dark, then it was very likely that they would be lost in the Tao and become the person who would bear the consequences of the calamity. On the other hand, those who took the path of seeking outside were now very obedient. They did not look for the fragments of the creation, nor did they release any mana waves into the void. He nodded secretly. This generation was considered self-aware, and knew that at this time, it was best to stay still just now. After Xiang Ju suffered a loss, he used all his energy to look for the land of creation. He was lucky. After a long time, he finally found a place and immediately settled in it. Although the essence of creation was not condensed much, it was still enough for him to stay in it. He could also pass on his Tao teachings and accept the spirit in it, so he was not afraid that it would be easily destroyed by external forces. Because the last time he passed on his Tao teachings, he did not avoid repeating the same mistakes. He put a lot of energy into the Tao teachings, so that if there was another collision, those followers would not collapse at once. In the past, Ji Zhuang, Yao Han, and even Wei Ming, because of their own height, they let the Tao teachings spread on their own and did not care too much. However, he did not hesitate to bend his position and do it himself, and indeed made the momentum of his Tao teachings rise extremely fast. He also wiped out all the threats that could threaten his Tao teachings, leaving only the living creatures that could be used to sharpen and promote his Tao teachings as much as possible to strengthen his Tao teachings. After Zhang Yan saw that Xiang Ju found a land of creation, he decided to make things difficult for him. He took a step forward and walked out of Bu Su's sky. In the next moment, he arrived in front of the land of fortune. The main purpose of this trip was to obtain Pauline's qi to promote the ascension of the body of strength, and the others were just supplementary. When Xiang Ju sensed Zhang Yan's arrival, he was surprised because this time, Zhang Yan actually came in person. If it was just to ask him some questions, there was obviously no need for this. He knew that he could not avoid it now, so he came out of the land of creation and bowed. So it is fellow Taoist Shenyuan, sorry for not going out to meet you. May I know why you have come to my place? Zhang Yan bowed back and said, today there is a matter that concerns you and me, so I had to come. Xiang Ju said, please tell me. Zhang Yan looked at Xiang Ju and said, do you know about the spirit of creation? Xiang Ju's heart skipped a beat. He still did not know that Wei Ming and Zhang Yan already knew about the spirit of creation. He only thought that he was the only one who knew about it. He did not expect Zhang Yan to mention it at this moment. He lowered his head slightly and said ambiguously, fellow Taoist also knows that part of my power is trapped by the power of robbery, and I have lost a lot of memory. There are some things that I am not clear about. Zhang Yan smiled and said, back then, the Vedanta bestowed the spirit of creation with consciousness in order to ascend. However, the spirit of creation that was born from it is the enemy of my generation, and it needs to devour the Vedanta in order to complete its own Tao. Xiang Ju pretended to be surprised and said with a frown, so there is such a threat to our generation. No wonder I also felt that there is another power outside of our Dharma power. However, it seems that it is also trapped by the tribulation power just like we did earlier. Zhang Yan said, although this spirit of creation is still trapped by the power of tribulation, if it had devoured a certain great virtue, it would be able to manifest the spirit of creation again and be used by the spirit of creation. Even those of the same Tao would find it difficult to distinguish. Xiang Ju looked up and showed some displeasure. Fellow Taoist, what do you mean? Do you think that I am the body of the spirit of creation? Zhang Yan said with a smile, whether you are or not, I can't confirm it. You can't prove it yourself either, so I can only wrong you for now. Xiang Ju felt that something was wrong and said in a low voice, what do you want to do? Zhang Yan smiled and said, if you are the body of the spirit of creation and this place is occupied, it may be used by it. Therefore, I cannot allow you to take this place. I hope that you can leave this place. Don't worry, I will not refine this place. Of course, if you can really distinguish this, I will return this place to you. Chapter 2202. Xiang Ju's expression changed slightly when he heard Zhang Yan's words. He actually wanted to say that Wei Ming also couldn't prove that he was the spirit of creation. But didn't he also occupy two places of creation? Why didn't he go find him? Why did he come to him instead? But he couldn't really say that. Not only would it not help him get out of his current predicament, but it would also offend Wei Ming. He also understood that this was just an excuse from Zhang Yan. Wei Ming wasn't here to reason with him unless he had a way to prove that he wasn't the spirit of creation. But he couldn't do that. Plus, he did have some connection with the spirit of creation, so returning to all you didn't rely solely on his own ability. He snorted, looked at Zhang Yan, and asked in a questioning tone, fellow Taoist, you said that I might be a spirit of creation. You're right, it's indeed difficult for me to prove myself, but I also have to ask you, fellow Taoist. Even if you only managed to become a spirit of creation after the spirit of creation shattered, there were still many spirits of creation that entered the all that exists at that time, and you might be one of them. If that's the case, wouldn't it be even more inappropriate for me to give up this place? Zhang Yan smiled faintly. If I was the spirit of creation, why would I allow you and Wei Ming to live here? I would have devoured you too long ago and wouldn't have come to negotiate with you now. Wouldn't it be better to just attack? Xiang Ju also knew that the possibility of Zhang Yan being the spirit of creation wasn't high. Otherwise, the spirit of creation wouldn't have colluded with him and secretly sent him back to all you. He was just trying to argue. He understood that he either had to endure it and agree to Zhang Yan's conditions to give up the land of fortune, or he had to reject Zhang Yan's suggestion. If he did, a battle might break out here. But he didn't think he had much chance of winning. Zhang Yan controlled Bushutian and many places of creation. Other than his own mana, he could also mobilize the Weili here. His chances of winning in a head-on clash were slim. But on second thought, if he just gave up without saying a word, it would seem like he was guilty. If he was really treated as the spirit of creation, he wouldn't be able to clear his name in the future. After all, this was not a battle to the death. If everything went according to his plan, there was still a chance. Even if he failed, he might be able to arouse Wei Ming's suspicions. Since Zhang Yan could oppress him this time, he could oppress others next time. Thus, he said in a low voice, "It's absolutely impossible for me to retreat just like this. I'm willing to experience a thing or two from fellow Taoist. If I can't defeat fellow Taoist, then I naturally have nothing to say." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Since fellow Taoist wishes to discuss the Tao, I will naturally accompany you." Xiangjue's face suddenly became a little more solemn. He said, "But if fellow Taoist and I fight, it will inevitably cause some disturbances. I have a suggestion. Why don't you and I each send out an avatar with the same mana to fight and determine the outcome? Then the real body will use mana to protect fellow Taoist. This way, our powers won't harm fellow Taoist. What does fellow Taoist think?" He felt that Zhang Yan's Weili was much stronger than his own. If they fought without restraint, he didn't think he had much chance of winning. But the avatar was different. Its power was limited, and Bushutian and many other places of creation could not be mobilized. This way, there was a certain chance of winning. Even if he lost, he could still save some face. Of course, Zhang Yan had to agree first. Otherwise, everything would be empty talk. Zhang Yan glanced at him and smiled. He said, "That's fine. Fellow Taoist still has many Weili trapped in the robbery power and can't use their full strength. If I beat you like this, I'm afraid you won't accept it. Let's do as I say." In fact, this did not make much difference to him. His Qi and strength body were combined. After attaining great virtue in Qi path, his body of strength path could only play a supporting role before his body of strength path was completed. However, under the restriction of his strength, he was able to unleash the techniques of his body of strength path. As for Bushutian and the other Weili, he only wanted to deal with Xiangjue, so he didn't intend to use them. When Xiangjue heard him agree, he relaxed a little and his spirits rose. This way, he still had a small chance of winning. With a thought, he released the Weili and turned it into an avatar. At the same time, the real body also slowly disappeared. Zhang Yan also retreated. At the same time, he left behind an avatar, and then his figure disappeared into the silence. Only the two avatars were left standing in the field. However, before they came into contact, the Weili outside had already collided and surged with each other and leaked outwards. Fortunately, the Weili that both sides used to condense avatars were extremely weak for great virtue. Even if they fought each other, as long as it didn't last for a long time and caused the Weili to rise endlessly, it wouldn't be destroyed in an instant. At the same time, because both sides were using the same amount of power, this battle would depend on each side's fighting methods. When Zhang Yan came to find Xiangjue, Wei Ming also noticed it. Seeing that the two were about to fight, he paid special attention. As Xiangjue thought, he was also afraid of Zhang Yan's strength. Otherwise, he wouldn't have accepted the latter's previous proposal. However, he thought that it was useless for the two to work together, so he had to remain patient for now. On the other side, when the Taoist in purple noticed the changes here, he was shocked. After the collapse of his previous body, he was extremely vigilant towards Zhang Yan. Because he didn't know the content of the conversation between the two, he was afraid that this matter was because Zhang Yan had found out about his collusion with Xiangjue. Therefore, he didn't dare to look too much. After just a glance, he retreated deeper into the silence. Meanwhile, in Bu Su Tian, the attention of the group of spirit refinement cultivators was involuntarily drawn over. However, the area where the two forces collided naturally repelled external forces, causing everyone to feel that the battlefield was very blurry. Only Qing Sheng, Xin Chang, Zhang Yuan, and the others who were inside focused on sensing it, as if they were afraid of missing it. Previously, Zhang Yan had shattered the Weili embodiment, allowing those who were watching the battle to benefit greatly. However, that was only the great virtue Weili, not the great virtue itself. This time, it was a battle between two great virtues. Such a scene was extremely rare, and if they could see it, who knew how much they would benefit? At this moment, where the two avatars were facing each other, Xiangjue cupped his hands and said, "Since you are a guest, please make your move first." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Here, there were advantages and disadvantages. Since the other party wanted him to make the first move, then he wouldn't be polite. He slowly raised his hand, opened his fingers, and grabbed at Xiangjue. Each great virtue wielded a part of the great Tao. Even a simple method was the manifestation of the great Tao. Therefore, the battle between two great virtues was like a game of chess. In a situation where both Weili were equal, it would depend on who had a deeper understanding of the Tao and who could use the great Tao to force the other into a dead end. When Xiangjue saw the large hand coming, he immediately tried to deduce and use his own understanding of the Tao to resolve this attack. Thus, he raised his hand and gently pushed outwards. In an instant, the power of impermanence was activated, and he gently pushed against the large hand that blocked all senses. Originally, according to his calculations, he could easily resolve this move and then use his understanding of the Tao to find an opening to launch an attack. Then, he would be able to gain a certain advantage. However, Zhang Yan's attack not only contained the Tao of Qi, but also the power of the Tao of strength. His body of strength was the foundation of the world and was rooted in everything. It wasn't something that could be easily shaken by the Tao. It required enough Weili to support it. Therefore, when Xiangjue pushed forward, he immediately realized that something was wrong. How could he not know that he had misjudged? In the battle of great virtues, if there was a mistake in attack and defense, there was almost no possibility of turning the situation around. One could only rely on one's own body to bear it, and then one's Tao would immediately be shaved off by the opponent. The power of great virtue coexisted with the Tao. If one lost a little bit of the Tao, then one's own strength would also be lost. Although it could be recovered after the battle, there was no such opportunity in battle. And in chess, this was equivalent to losing a piece in the beginning of the battle. He didn't want to suffer such a terrible consequence right at the start of the battle. This would definitely be disadvantageous to the subsequent battles, so he needed something to bear the burden for him. Thus, with a thought, a dazzling golden lotus appeared in front of him and forcefully stopped the large hand. Zhang Yan smiled. With a thought, Pauline also appeared outside of his body. With a shake, a brilliance sprinkled, and the endless Weili came pouring over. Xiangjue's heart trembled. There was no trick to dealing with the Pauline Weili. He could only divide his own Fa Li to resist, but this naturally made it too late for him to fight back. Zhang Yan didn't intend to be locked in a stalemate with him for a long time. With a command in his heart, a precious pearl appeared out of thin air, and it was indistinct and coiled with immortal mist. As soon as it appeared, it had already smashed onto the mighty energy of sense. Amidst the rumbling, Xiangjue suddenly felt that he couldn't hold on for long. He knew that he had lost the opportunity and had fallen into an extremely passive situation. With Zhang Yan's ability, there was no way he would give him a chance to counterattack. It was better to admit defeat earlier, at least the situation wouldn't be so ugly. Therefore, he simply withdrew the Weili and let this avatar dissipate. A moment later, he walked out of the void and also withdrew Pauline. At this moment, he frowned, as if he felt that Pauline was missing something, but it also seemed that nothing was missing. This might be related to the battle with Zhang Yan just now. Because part of his Fa Li wasn't complete, Pauline wasn't truly complete either. Moreover, he didn't sense any danger at the moment, so he didn't continue to pursue the matter. He cupped his hands and sighed. This battle is fellow Taoists' victory. I will keep my promise and retreat from the land of fortune. Zhang Yan issued a command in his mind, and the lotus and the high zenith divine pearl vanished without a trace. He said, "What I said earlier still stands. So long as fellow Taoist can prove himself, then I'll naturally return this place to fellow Taoist." Xiangjue didn't say anything more. His figure disappeared into the void in the blink of an eye. Seeing him leave, Zhang Yan left an avatar to go to the land of fortune. Then, with a thought, he returned to the Qinghuan Palace. After sitting on the jade platform, he flicked his sleeve and a wisp of Pauline's qi drifted out. The main purpose of this time was to obtain this Pauline's qi. Everything else was just incidental. Now that he had succeeded, he could use it to calculate the method to improve his strength body. Chapter 2203. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and the 5 strands of Pauline's qi that he had previously obtained emerged from his palm in succession, and stood side by side with the strand from before. He felt for a moment, and under the stirring of the 6 strands of Pauline's qi, the unique power hidden underneath had already revealed a slight clue, indicating that this amount was enough for him to carry out the next step of deduction, and there was no need to find another strand. He nodded to himself. This was similar to his previous deduction. If Xiao Ke was present, although he believed that he could obtain qi from Wei Ming through negotiation, doing so would expose his own purpose. Even though Wei Ming didn't know what he wanted to do, once the news spread, whether it was him or the great virtue that came later, they would definitely be on guard. This would have a certain impact on his subsequent search for this thing. Avoiding it now was undoubtedly the best result. He first tried to use his own Weili to push the 6 strands of qi to collide with each other, but after a long time, he found that the unique power was still buried in the extreme depths. This was like gently stirring the surface of the water, but was unable to have any effect on the things buried under the water. He also found that this collision of qi followed a certain principle, and he needed to understand the changes of the great Tao here to be able to glimpse that power. And the Weili collision between Pauline's qi was not isolated, because the power itself came from Pauline, so it also caused Pauline beside him to produce an extremely slight tremble, and the more complete Pauline was, the more intense the tremble was. He knew that this was due to the effect of forcefully unraveling the Tao method. If this continued, he was afraid that before he could find that unique power, he would be discovered by Wei Ming and Xiangjue. Unless he could find the right way, and at the same time use his own Weili to appease them, he could avoid such a thing. Fortunately, he was already prepared for this. He immediately sank his mind into the remnant jade, and began to deduce here. In just an instant, he opened his eyes, and his mind had already turned around to look at the 6 strands of qi. Under his gaze, the 6 strands of qi were automatically fused and gathered together, but he could still feel that the 6 powers were actually carrying out some kind of collision. They were also colliding with each other, but it was not as crude and rough as just now. Instead, it was natural and smooth, as if it was innately like this. It could be seen that all the changes were following a certain principle. And during this process, an unfathomable power began to be drawn out from the silence. Although it was extremely weak, it was still seen by him. For a Vedanta, as long as there was no opposing power, then it was something that he could recognize. Therefore, even if he did not use the 6 strands of Pauline's power, he could still rely on his own Weili to draw it out. But at this time, he found that many of the worlds seemed a little dimmer than before. Not only that, but even the ordinary spirit cultivators' Weili also became a little. And the strange thing was that only when he looked at it purely with his strength path body could he notice all of this. In the eyes of his chi path body, nothing had changed. Because of this, he observed deeply and found that this power did not devour all things, but weakened the original foundation of all things. If one was originally 1, then after this power changed, it became 2 and 1. If this continued, perhaps all things would continue to go through this kind of change. On the surface, nothing had changed, but in reality, it had already slid endlessly to an unfathomable place. However, this was not all things being targeted by this power, but just affected. This power was actually probing the most subtle places. If it was allowed to go endlessly, it might be able to shake the foundation of all things. Here, only the Vedanta were not affected by this because they themselves were already in the great Tao, and no matter how much the things changed, they could not surpass the great Tao. This was also why the Vedanta Wali could overturn all things, but they themselves could exist. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Perhaps when all of the lotus's energy was gathered in one place, he would be able to touch the true essence of nothingness. Only when all living things returned to silence would the power of being be drawn out. Only then would he be able to separate all being. He could see that this was another path that could touch the source of the great Tao. It was different from the Qi path that only asked oneself. It could be said to be simple and direct, completely coming from the outside, breaking through with force. This was very compatible with the strength path. If he could obtain this level of power, it would be equivalent to controlling a part of the great Tao. His strength would greatly increase, and he would be closer to the source of the great Tao. However, doing this was equivalent to stealing the power of the great Tao from Pauline. Before it was perfected, perhaps there would be no effect, but when it was truly cultivated, all the Pauline power would be useless. At that time, he would probably only be able to open all things with his strength path body. It was just that he was far from reaching this step, so there was no need to think about it for the time being. What he needed to consider now was that once he took this step, the Vedanta might sense it. Even if they could not calculate what he was doing, they would try to set up many obstacles. But in order to fight against the spirit of creation that would eventually come, he had to take this path. After making up his mind, he did not hesitate. With a thought, he drew out the unique power bit by bit and built it into his strength path body. In fact, from this moment on, he had already begun some kind of competition with creation Pauline. On the day he succeeded, the power that these 6 lotuses were originally able to draw would be snatched away by him. In other words, the power that could originally only be controlled by creation Pauline would be reduced because he had forced his way in. Fortunately, Pauline was held in the hands of different Vedanta. If there were not more than 6 Pauline flowers gathered together, this power would not be involved, so there was no need to worry about this matter being discovered. As he gradually drew out this power, it was fine at first, but after a long time, there was a heavy pressure on him. If he wanted to gain benefits, he would have to suffer the power. This was the power that was originally born by Pauline being transferred to him. But if he only relied on his strength path body to resist it, he was still slightly lacking. So if he wanted to smoothly refine this power, he would need the help of his Qi path Wali. He smiled. Before he achieved great virtue, he used the body of strength as the foundation of the world, but now it was the opposite. He needed to use the mighty force of the path of Qi as a supplement to protect the body of strength as he climbed towards perfection. This was the change of yin and yang, but it was naturally in line with the principle of the great Tao. Just as he was cultivating, the clone that was left in the meeting hall opened his eyes and looked outside. He saw the array spirit coming in from outside, bowing and saying, "Master, Taoist Qing Sheng is here to pay his respects." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Invite him in for a chat." After a short while, Taoist Qing Sheng entered the hall and bowed. After greeting him, Zhang Yan invited him to take a seat and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, you are dedicated to Tao and would not come to me for no reason. Is there a problem in your cultivation?" Qing Sheng admitted frankly, "Today, I came to see fellow Taoist for the matter of cultivation." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "My clone has been preaching Tao in the palace every day. Is that not enough?" Qing Sheng said, "Your teachings are useful and I have benefited a lot from it. Recently, I have the intention to break through the second gate. It is hard to predict whether I will succeed or fail. Therefore, before I leave, I specially came here to greet fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan could not help but laugh and said, "Fellow Taoist, I don't think you are here just for this. Why don't you tell me what you have to say?" Qing Sheng was silent for a while, then he raised his head and said, "If that is the case, I will say it directly." He raised his hand and bowed, "If I fail this time, I will enter eternal silence and there is no need to mention anything else. If I succeed, I wonder if fellow Taoist can tell me the way to the upper realm?" At this moment, he added with incomparable sincerity, "If I succeed, I will not forget fellow Taoist's kindness." Zhang Yan looked at him but did not give an answer. He only said, "Fellow Taoist, go ahead. If you can come back, I will give you an answer." In a certain place of creation, Wei Ming was sitting there. In the battle between Zhang Yan and Xiang Ju, it was not difficult for him to see that Xiang Ju had the upper hand in the battle between the clones. Even so, he was still defeated and did not even pose a threat to Zhang Yan. If it was a real battle, Zhang Yan could also use Bu Shutian and many Weili from the places of creation. That would be even more unstoppable. When he saw this scene, he was also worried. What if Zhang Yan used the same excuse to target him? What should he do? However, after thinking about it again, the possibility of this was not high. This was because Zhang Yan could not push all of his fellow Taoists to the opposite side. Since he had already targeted Xiang Ju, he would not target him again. At the same time, he also thought that dealing with Xiang Ju this way would only benefit him. With one less person searching for the places of creation, he would have a higher chance of finding such a place. At this moment, Xiang Ju was floating in the silence, but his expression was incomparably solemn. He was thinking about how to get out of the predicament in front of him. If he searched for the places of creation now, it might be taken away by Zhang Yan again. From this point of view, there were only two ways. One was to wait for the next Vedanta to come. With the combined strength of several people, they might be able to force Zhang Yan to retreat and give up the place of creation for everyone to enjoy. The other was to find a way to prove that he had nothing to do with the spirit of creation. There was no need to think too much about the latter. As early as when Zhang Yan asked him to prove it, he had already calculated that there was no impeccable way to do this. Even if the spirit of creation really appeared in front of him, he would still not be able to escape suspicion. Unless he could suppress Zhang Yan, then his words would naturally be reasonable. Here, the easiest way to recover one's own strength was the only way. The mighty force of great virtue was completely different when it was complete and incomplete. Even the treasure lotus of good fortune in one's hand would be completely restored, and one's battle prowess would increase by more than a little. However, if he only relied on himself, it might still take a long time. Although the silence was fragmented and there was his own Weili leaking out from the robbery power, it was really too slow. But if there was someone here to help, it would be different. His eyes gradually became a bit colder. Previously, the spirit of creation helped him return, and naturally gave him a way to link up with its power. In fact, he did not want to have anything to do with it, so he found the purple-clothed Taoist. He wanted to return the favor here and end this matter as soon as possible. But according to the current situation, he might have to borrow its power. Chapter 2204. Xiang Ju patiently found a fragment of good fortune and sank into it. When he left the land of good fortune, he took his disciples with him. At this time, he sent them into the world attached to this fragment of good fortune. After all, he had spent a lot of effort in teaching them. If he abandoned them, he would have to start all over again. He thought that before he found the place of creation, Zhang Yan wouldn't bother with him anymore. At this moment, he could focus on advancing the Tao impartation and combining it with the nature of creation. After sitting down, he used his mind to find the Weili of the spirit of good fortune. Although he took the initiative to collude with it this time, he was still very afraid of the spirit of good fortune. He did not forget that it needed to devour all the great virtues to complete its great Tao. Even if it helped him last time, it was only to achieve its ultimate goal. Originally, he was also worried that if he asked it to help him retrieve the damaged Weili again, it might do something to it. Therefore, he would rather collect the Weili bit by bit. However, he could not wait any longer. He felt that he could take a risk. Even if there were some hidden dangers, when his Taoist body was complete, as long as the spirit of good fortune did not fall into the all things, there would be a way to solve it. As for Wei Ming, Zhang Yan, and the others, he didn't have to pay any attention to them. Even if they might notice something, he'd already been suspected to be the spirit of creation, so what was there to worry about? As he searched, he quickly found the Weili that the spirit of good fortune had leaked into the all things. However, when he tried to find it, he was blocked by a tribulation power. He found that he could not go any further. After a moment of contemplation, he entered the divine will. A moment later, The divine will of the Taoist in purple arrived. He bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiangju, are you looking for me because of what happened last time?" Xiangju said, "I'm still working on it." Fellow Taoist knows that it's not easy to avoid Taoist Xuanyuan's qi. If I'm not careful, I'll be caught by him. This time, perhaps because I wasn't careful, he seemed to have discovered something. Not only did he come looking for me, he even chased me out of the place of fortune that I worked so hard to find. I'm sure these Taoists have seen it. The purple-robed Taoist nodded and said, "Then how can I help you?" Xiangju said, "There is indeed something that fellow Taoist can help with." The purple-robed Taoist said, "Fellow Taoist, please speak." Xiangju said, "My body is not complete, which is why I am being restrained by Taoist Xianyuan. I need the true master behind you to help me retrieve the arcane energy that was trapped by the tribulation power. However, after I fell into Zhu Yu's hands, it will be difficult for me to contact him. I need you to help me convey this message." The purple-robed Taoist seemed to be considering it, but he was extremely reluctant in his heart. Ever since he knew where he came from, he had never wanted to have anything to do with the true master. He also had his own considerations when he used Pauline to lure the Whaley back. After thinking about it, he decided to agree first and then find an excuse to say that there was no response from the main body. Thus, he said, "I will try to pass on fellow Taoist's request." He paused for a moment and said, "However, I hope fellow Taoist will pay more attention to the matter I asked of you last time." Xiangju's voice was slightly cold. "Even if you didn't ask, I wouldn't have let go. When I return, I'll keep a close eye on this matter." Even though it seemed like he'd backed down because he was no match for Zhang Yan, it couldn't conceal the fact that he'd been chased out of the land of creation by Zhang Yan. This was extremely humiliating for him, so he decided to cause even more trouble for Zhang Yan. 3 years later, in the Mirror Lake, where the Yen sect altar was, Zhang Chan was meditating in the hall of worship when a disciple of the Yen sect hurried in and bowed. Reporting to Jinren, "The 2 people have been sent here. Jinren, please tell us how to deal with them." Zhang Chan said, "It seems so. Go and call Meng Hu here." After the disciple bowed, he left the hall to make arrangements. Not long after, Meng Hu came into the hall and bowed. He said, "I heard teacher's call, so I came immediately. What orders does teacher have for me?" Zhang Chan said, "There are 2 disciples of the Yen sect here. They are of the same origin as you, but they have been bewitched by others and their state of mind is unstable. However, they have made many contributions to the Yen sect. Later, due to the change in the Yen sect, they reincarnated again, so they were dealt with like this. It's a pity. You have not been influenced by others twice, which shows that you have a firm mind, so I asked you to go and advise them." Meng Hu had told Zhang Chan about the 2 visions he encountered. Zhang Chan did not care about this matter. His disciple was a spirit of fortune, so he would definitely encounter such things. He thought that he had done enough to influence Meng Hu imperceptibly in the past. If Meng Hu was shaken by a few dreams, it meant that it was impossible for the spirit of fortune to be enlightened. Fortunately, he was quite satisfied with the result. Although Meng Hu was slightly different from ordinary cultivators, he did not deviate from his teachings. Meng Hu was also curious about the 2 people. He had not seen any spirit of fortune other than himself, so he immediately said, "I will go now." Zhang Chan said, "Hold on, take these 2 items." He swung his sleeve, and 2 talismans turned into spiritual light and flew out. Meng Hu took them and put them in his bosom. He bowed again and said, "I will take my leave." Zhang Chan said, "Go." He did not ask Meng Hu if he could succeed. This was just a tentative attempt. If he could not succeed, he could just deal with the 2 people directly. It would not be so troublesome. Meng Hu left the hall and came to the bottom of a cliff under the guidance of the talismans. The guard said, "Protector, these 2 people are locked in different areas. Do you want me to bring the other person here?" Meng Hu agreed and went up the cliff. After a while, he reached the top of the cliff. This place was surrounded by a circle of prohibition. A child stood in the circle. He looked young, but he had a proud expression. He stood there with his hands behind his back like an adult and asked, "Who are you?" Meng Hu touched his chin and said, I should be your long-lost elder brother. The child raised his chin and said in disdain, nonsense. I am born from the heavens and the earth, born from fortune. How can there be an elder brother like you? Meng Hu said, what a coincidence. I am also born from the heavens and the earth, born from fortune. I am born extraordinary, and my aptitude is superb. I am born extraordinary, and my aptitude is superb. I can see things clearly, there is nothing I cannot understand. Cultivation has never been difficult. I am also able to see and understand everything. There is nothing I cannot comprehend. Cultivation has never been difficult. Meng Hu glanced at him as if saying, you and I are so similar, and you dare to go against your conscience and say that I am not your elder brother? The child blushed and shouted, we are different. Meng Hu thought about it and said in complete agreement, yes, we are different. He would not be easily bewitched and shaken by others. This child was indeed far inferior to him, but he could also understand that there were not many people like him in the world. The child said angrily, if I say I am not, then I am not. If it wasn't for teaching Yen restraining me and making it difficult for my nature to change, my achievements would be more than 10 times what they are now. How would I be similar to you? Meng Hu shook his head and said, no, it isn't teaching Yen restraining you, but teaching Yen saved your life. The child said angrily, you're talking nonsense again. Even though I was found by Yen Jiao when I was young, my parents are still alive. I could cultivate Dao before I was 5 years old, but they only taught me Dao techniques after I was 5 years old. How can this be considered as saving me? Meng Hu said slowly, we spirits of creation are born with cultivation seeds. If we can't be used by others to benefit the world, then we can't harm you. Now that you are under the care of teaching Yen, you won't become a disaster and can cultivate peacefully instead. It seems that teaching Yen is restraining you, but think about it carefully. Isn't this saving your life? Hearing what he said, the child felt that it seemed to make some sense, but he also felt that something was wrong and asked doubtfully, is that so? Meng Hu took a few steps forward and sighed, it's fine if I don't become your elder brother. I'll let you go this once and be your foster father. The child was startled and said, foster father? Meng Hu nodded in satisfaction and went forward to pat his head, saying, good boy. The child's face was full of anger. He pushed his hand away and retreated, saying, wishful thinking. Even if I die here, I won't recognize you as my foster father. At this moment, the disciple came forward with a person and bowed to Meng Hu, saying, Protector, I've brought the person. Meng Hu looked over and saw that the person was a young cultivator. His skin was fair and clean, and he looked cultured and refined. However, his eyes were sinister and ruthless. When he looked at people, he lowered his head slightly as if he was spying in the dark. He seemed to have noticed Meng Hu's gaze and also came forward to bow, saying, This must be Protector Meng, right? Meng Hu asked curiously, You recognize me? The young cultivator smiled and said, Although others don't know Protector Meng's identity, someone in the heart realm has already informed me. I originally thought that you and I are the same kind of people, but I didn't expect Protector Meng to come and persuade me today. Speaking of which, before Protector Meng, there were 5 people who tried to persuade me, but they couldn't win against me. He held his chest high. It's like us spirits of creation reincarnated and seized the creation of heaven and earth. Our future achievements are limitless, and it'll be easy for us to seek the great Tao in the future. But in teaching Yen, being a slave or a servant, no matter how good it is it to talk about detachment? How is it to talk about freedom? The child's eyes lit up as he listened, and he nodded repeatedly. Meng Hu said seriously, Teaching Yen taught you Tao techniques, taught you skills, and taught you how to be a person. Have you forgotten all of that? The young cultivator snorted and said, Without them, could it be that I can't cultivate the great Tao? Looking at the heaven and earth, distinguishing the sun and moon, knowing the longitude and latitude, observing yin and yang, one can seek the great Tao everywhere. Teaching Yen found us here, but it's only because they are afraid of us, so they can monitor us closely. Once we get out of this confinement, we can finally display our strengths. Meng Hu sighed and said, It's hopeless. He took out the two talisman and blew gently on one of them. The young cultivator's eyes suddenly widened, and then cracks spread on his body. He looked at himself a few times and only took a few steps back. With a crash, he scattered into shattered crystals all over the ground, and after a few breaths, he turned into a pitch-black powder on the ground. Meng Hu shook his hand and scattered the ashes of the talisman in his hand. Then, as if he thought of something, he tilted his head and looked at the child. He held the other talisman and shook it, and said, "What do you say?" "Godfather." The child bent down and kowtowed respectfully and said, "Your son greets Godfather." Chapter 2205. With the help of Chi Path magic power, Zhang Yan drew out the power bit by bit and refined it into his strength path body. His strength path body could refine all things, and once the upper level of power was integrated, it could push his cultivation to a higher level. This was not something that could be completed by simply swallowing. One also needed to understand the changes of the great Tao and use the cultivation method to coordinate with it. But at the great virtue level, as long as the will was there, then everything could be achieved naturally. As the power continued to be refined into his body, he could infer that this step would not take long to complete. If he wanted to push it forward, it would not be a problem to speed it up. Because logically speaking, as long as he had enough Chi Path Weili, he could resist all the pressure brought by the power. Moreover, he had Bu Su Tian and the land of creation as his backing. Even if there were any changes, he would have a way to deal with it, so it was fine to be a little more aggressive. This was only the benefit of the strength path. This time, when he resisted this power, he also comprehended the Tao here, and his understanding of the great Tao increased by another level. If not for the existence of creation Pauline, perhaps this part of the great Tao would have been taken by him, and now he could only share it. However, if he could find all of Pauline's energy, he would naturally be able to absorb this part of the great Tao into his body. After 200 years of seclusion, his strength path body was tempered successfully, but it was not complete. It was only a firm foundation that led to the final path. At this moment, he no longer triggered the unique power, but the Weili around him that was used to resist could not be withdrawn. He had to find a way to calm this power. Thus, with a turn of his mind, the 6 clashing Pauline's energies slowly dispersed. Without the traction of the energy, the power was like water without a source, no longer leaking out. However, the power that had entered the great virtue but had not been refined by him could not return for a while. If left alone, it would never dissipate, and would continue to suppress everything in the great virtue. This power could not be refined, so he had to use his own Weili to suppress it, or find another way to use it for other purposes. He thought about it and came up with an idea. He decided to condense it into a treasure. That way, it wouldn't be difficult to solve this problem. He stretched out his finger and released a wisp of essence Qi from his body. He mixed it with the essence Qi and bound it with his mind. Many Dharma spells floated and appeared in the essence Qi. After a while, it turned into a black cloak and fell on his body. This cloak purely relied on his body of strength to suppress it. Of course, he did not need to spend any effort here. As long as it was close to him, he could continue to maintain it. If it was elsewhere, it would be in danger of collapsing. If he had to fight with an enemy, once he was under pressure from an external force and had no time to take care of himself, this robe could help him share some of the burden. On the other hand, if he had the opportunity to come into contact with that mysterious power and cultivate it to perfection, then this robe could even receive the same benefits. He shook open his sleeves and glanced at it, thinking to himself, "Now that I have the land of fortune and this treasured robe to defend, I only have the supreme divine pearl to attack, but I feel that it is too little. I might as well refine another one." With this thought, he called out with his mind and a ball of clear light floated in front of him. He took out the Qinghong sword pill. In the battle with Xiang Jue's doppelganger, he thought about ending the battle as soon as possible, so he took out the divine pearl of one. This reforged magic treasure did not disappoint him, forcing Xiang Jue to admit defeat in just a few moves. But from this, it could be seen that Xiang Ju only felt that he was not a match for Xiang Ju and was worried that he would lose too badly, so he retreated in advance. It was not that he was beaten to the point where he had no strength to fight back. If he was besieged by 2 or 3 great virtues, and the supreme divine pearl was slightly weak, then the sword pill could make up for it. He had tried to improve the sword pill once before, but the great virtues had mastered the path of nothingness. Under this realm, no matter how powerful you were, under the shroud of the Whaley, you could be sent into nothingness in an instant. So he opened the limit of the great Tao and tempered it again. This sword pill was in harmony with his mind. Even if he sent it into the great Tao, he could summon it back with a thought. He did not need to be as careful as when he refined the supreme divine pearl. He raised his hand and glanced at the sword pellet. Instantly, an infinite amount of clear light shone from it. When the light dissipated, there was nothing left in his hand. However, in the blink of an eye, a spiritual light shone from nothingness and turned into the size of a longan. The clear light condensed and returned to its original form. He nodded slightly, and with a thought he put it away. Now that the matter was settled, he was surprised. He saw that his clone had found another land of fortune that was neither too big nor too small. Currently, he had already occupied it and passed down his Tao technique in the main world that was attached to it. But when he glanced around again, he found that the number of strange creatures in this land of creation had increased by a lot. There were also people from the Luo sect and the De sect who had revived from the ashes. And it was not only here, except for Bu Su Tian, the other places of creation were the same, causing the expansion of the Yen sect to slow down for a while. It was not difficult to see that there must be a Whaley behind this. And to be able to invade the realm unknowingly, it should be the power of the creation Pauline. He observed for a while and found that the Whaley had already retreated. He could not help but sneer. There were not many people who had the power of Pauline, and there was no one else but Xiangju who dared to do this in secret. It should be that he was angry that he was driven out of the land of creation and just now did this little thing. But this matter was not big or small. The number of demons and strange creatures had increased, and the Luo sect and the De sect had risen again. This was all in the territory of the Yen sect, and the Yen sect alone might not be able to deal with it. He pondered for a while. Being a Whaley, it was inconvenient for him to intervene in the specific matters. But here, he could ask the cultivators of the 9 continents to help. After making up his mind, he immediately summoned Jingyu and ordered him to bring a talisman to the 9 continents to inform the cultivators of the 9 continents. If he had spare time, he could help the cultivators of the Yen sect to eliminate the heretics. In the headquarters of the Yen sect, after Gao Qingtu went into seclusion, he handed over the affairs to Gao Gua. He was the first person to follow Gao Qingtu, and his cultivation was at the highest level in the sect. Therefore, the followers were more convinced, and even Tang Yu was convinced. However, even though he was temporarily acting as the sect master, he didn't possess Gao Qingtu's prestige after all. In reality, he was only able to manage some territories that were completely controlled by the Taoists of the Heavenly Evolution sect, whereas he left most of the other branches unchecked. And the Taoists of the Yen sect in the land of creation outside of Bu Su Tian relied on the realm gate established by Zhang Yan's Whaley to travel. But because the territories there were extremely vast, and the Yen sect had nothing to do with Bu Su Tian sect when it was first established, the headquarters could not control much, and only sent a messenger to be stationed there. But recently, the followers of these altars kept reporting that they had been attacked by great demons, and begged the headquarters to send people to help. Gao Gua also had a headache. Although the Yen sect was still expanding, most of them were in the territories without spiritual vigor, and there were few places where spiritual vigor flourished were completely occupied. This was because there were places with spiritual vigor, and there would always be Taoist sects and demons. As long as the Taoist sects did not provoke the Yen sect, there would not be any conflicts. But demons were not in this category. Therefore, not only could they reduce the threat of humanity, but they could also expand their sphere of influence. This was also the practice of the Yen sect for a long time. But this was not something that could be solved with 1 or 2 upper realm cultivators. It could be said that no matter how many people there were, it would not be enough. Just as he was worrying about this matter, a disciple came to report, "Leader, a Taoist has arrived from outside the boundary." He said that he wanted to discuss with the Yen sect about joining forces to fight against the demons and demons. Gaogwa said, "I wonder which sect he is from? How did he find this place?" The disciple said, "This Taoist claims to be from Ana Temple." Gaogwa said, "Oh, then he is considered one of us. Quick, take my leader's decree and invite him in." At his position, he already knew a little about some things. The headmaster of Aneta Temple seemed to have a deep relationship with his sect's founder. In the past, the disciples of the two sects often helped each other, but the higher-ups of the two sects had never met each other. After a while, a tall and skinny Taoist walked in and bowed, "I Kubiu greet Leader Gao." Gaogwa returned the greeting and said, "Taoist friend, you have come from afar, please take a seat." Kubiu thanked him and sat down. Gaogwa said, "Just now I heard from the disciples that you are here to help me fight against the demons and demons?" Kubiu said in a serious tone, "Yes, the headmaster of my sect has an order. He said that your sect is currently short of manpower and has encountered many difficulties. Therefore, he has specially ordered the various sects to help your sect in exterminating the heretics. I, on the other hand, will be responsible for the transportation between our sections." Gaogwa was delighted when he heard this. Aneta Temple also had many subsects in the various worlds, and they were good at subduing demons. Therefore, they had the most dealings with Yanjiao. If it was just Taoist Ku alone, it wouldn't be of much use. It would only be a drop in the bucket. However, with the help of Huanjin Temple, things would be different. He stood up, clasped his hands and said, "Many thanks for your honorable cult's help. I really thank you here. You are too kind." Kubiu hurriedly stood up, avoiding his bow. Stroking his beard, he said with a smile, "Your sect has only just encountered such a difficult situation. With your sect's power, in a few thousand or 10,000 years, you will have enough people to deal with this problem." Gaogwa shook his head, "It's not that easy." Speaking of the Yanjiao technique, it was extremely easy to get started. It could be cultivated without any external objects, and one could quickly gain a foothold wherever one went. However, the higher one went, the more difficult it would be. It was extremely demanding on one's mind and willpower. He felt that it would be good enough if they could maintain the territory they currently occupied. If they really had enough manpower, then their power would be unimaginably huge. At that time, it wouldn't be a battle with the demons, but a conflict with the Taoist sects in the various worlds. However, the higher-ups of Yanjiao were very clear-headed, so they had always maintained a friendly relationship with the various sections. Even if such a day really came, they would restrain themselves internally and wouldn't easily make enemies with them. The two discussed for a while more and settled the general matters. At this moment, a disciple came to report, "There is a Taoist Yuan visiting outside. He said he wants to borrow the realm gate of Yanjiao." Chapter 2206. Taoist Yuan? Gaogwa looked at Kubiu and said, "Taoist Ku, do you know of this person?" Kubiu thought for a moment and smiled, "I do know of one. If it's really him, then he must have a deep relationship with your cult. He might also be here for your cult's matters. Moreover, this person is powerful. If he makes a move, it won't be hard to solve many of your cult's troubles." Gaogwa couldn't help but be cautious when he heard this. He hadn't seen the cult ancestor yet, but he was sure that it was a mighty figure in the heavens. Mighty figures also had disciples and people close to them. Their cult Yen abided by the rules and never took the initiative to inquire about this matter. However, they always treated people who might be related to the cult ancestor with respect. He said, "If that's the case, I'll personally come out to welcome him." Kubiu said, "I'll go with Manager Gao." The two left the cult Yan's main altar and saw a black-clothed Taoist standing outside the realm gate. Kubiu nodded at Gaogwa and walked in front of him. He cupped his hands and said, "Deacon Kubiu of the Huanjin Temple's branch sect greets Yuan Shangjin." "Greetings, Taoist Ku." Yuan Zhangqing raised his hand and returned the greeting. Gaogwa also came forward to greet him and said, "I'm Gaogwa, the manager of the cult Yan's main altar." May I know why Yuan Shangjin is here? Yuan Zhangqing answered straightforwardly, I'm here to kill the demons. Kubuyu's eyelids twitched. Although this person's voice wasn't loud and sounded very calm, he could clearly feel the boundless murderous intent behind him. Gaogua thought for a moment and said, if that's the case. He waved his hand and a jade scroll fell down. All the great demons and ferocious beasts of the cult Yen No are recorded in this scroll. However, due to my cultivation, I might not be able to see some of them. He flicked the scroll again and a ray of light entered it. He casually passed it forward. Yuan Shangjin can use this to enter any realm gate of our cult. Yuan Zhangqing nodded and said, this is enough. He waved his sleeve and kept the scroll. Gaogua saw that he had no intention of staying for long and said, I will bring Yuan Shangjin to the realm gate. Yuan Zhangqing said, there's no need to trouble Manager Gao. Just ask a disciple to lead the way. Gaogua immediately summoned a disciple and gave him some instructions. Yuan Zhangqing cupped his hands and followed the disciple. Kubuyu replied, rest assured, this Yuan Shangjin abhors demons that wreak havoc in the world. With him around, these beasts won't be able to roam free for long. Yuan Zhangqing followed the disciple and soon arrived in front of an altar. Up above was a glowing shield that rippled like water. It was even grander and more spectacular than the mountain and sea realm's realm pass. The disciple said, Shangjin, with this realm gate, you can go anywhere you want. Yuan Zhangqing nodded and gave him a bottle of pills, saying, go. The disciple happily received it, bowed, and left the altar. Yuan Zhangqing took out the jade scroll and scanned it with his consciousness. This time, Zhang Yan issued an announcement that cultivators of the 9 continents could accept the Yen sect's request to exterminate demons and beasts, and the Yen sect would treat them well. Although Zhang Yan didn't order his disciple to do this, he felt that it was necessary to share his master's burden. Moreover, he wanted to use the origin star technique to refine a handy treasure. If he succeeded in obtaining this treasure, he wouldn't need to meet face to face if he wanted to exterminate demons in the future. He just needed to sense them and use the technique to kill them from thousands of miles away. However, he needed to kill at least tens of thousands of great demons, and the more the better. The most troublesome thing was that these great demons were scattered throughout the heavens, making it difficult to find them. Fortunately, the Yen sect's disciples were scattered throughout the myriad worlds, and there was a realm gate that led to any place. The two worked well together. After a while, he had already chosen a target, so he flung his sleeve and walked toward the light screen. He felt his body sink, and he had already passed through the realm gate and arrived at another altar. He sensed that this place was a vast land. He raised his head to look at the sky, and there were countless stars twinkling. With a thought, his figure turned into a clear light and headed toward a certain planet. The disciple guarding the altar was dozing off when he felt the movement of the realm gate. He hurriedly opened his eyes to take a look, but he didn't see anyone. He knew that an almighty cultivator of the upper realm was passing by, so he quickly took out a jade disc and noted it down. He then reported it to the sect through the realm gate. After seeing that there was no problem, he was relieved. At this moment, Yuan Zhangqing had already arrived at his first chosen target. He quietly looked at the planet that looked very ordinary on the surface, but was actually hollowed out on the inside. There was a towering giant tree growing on the planet. Its canopy covered the sky and the sun, and its roots spread all over the land. This was a great demon at the level of mortal metamorphosis. Its name was Willow Ji. When this demon was growing, it had already devoured the flesh, blood, and souls of all living creatures on the planet. Now, it was constantly plundering the spiritual opportunity on the roots of the planet. After squeezing out all the spiritual opportunity on the planet, it would use its mana to move to the next place, and then repeat the same action. The person from Yanjiao did not know what was going on, so he sent disciples here. There were more than 300 people, but in the end, only 20 of them came out on a flying shuttle. He then reported this matter to the main altar. However, in the current Yanjiao, there were very few people who had reached this level, and each of them had important responsibilities. Before they had the time, it was impossible for them to make a special trip for a land that no one lived in. Yuan Jingqing flung his sleeve, and a heavenly shuttle flew toward the planet. Willow Ji sensed an external threat, and countless branches rose up, densely stretching towards the sky. In an instant, the entire planet was wrapped up. At this moment, Yuan Jingqing did not make any more movements, and only watched calmly. The heavenly shuttle landed directly on one of the branches, but it did not penetrate it, nor did it cause any earth-shattering damage. It was only nailed to the surface. At this moment, Willow Ji calmed down, but after a few breaths, it suddenly went berserk and almost crazily swung the branches as if it was trying to get rid of something. Not long after, the originally thick branches gradually became thin and shriveled, and at the same time, the tall canopy also withered and withered. Not only that, but that towering giant tree shrank at a visible speed. In just 100 breaths, it had shrunk into a withered willow tree that was as tall as a person. Only its roots still had the last bit of spirituality, but it was dull and lifeless, as if its original cultivation of tens of thousands of years had never existed. Yuan Jingqing's body flickered, and he landed on the planet. With a wave of his hand, the willow tree was kept in his sleeve, and he teleported back to the realm gate in an instant. Without stopping, he passed through the realm gate and continued to look for his next target. Before gathering tens of thousands of great demons, he would not stop for the time being. Somewhere in the void, the purple-clothed Taoist's expression was extremely ugly. After meeting with Xiang Jue that time, he agreed on the surface to pass on the intention of retrieving the power to the real body, but in his heart he had made up his mind to ignore this matter. However, just now, he found that he had done it unknowingly, and even he himself did not know when he had done it. More importantly, after he came out of meditation, he found that he did not stay in the original place, but had changed to another place. He could not help but suspect that it was very likely that he had collapsed again for some reason, and the current body was condensed again, but it had inherited the knowledge and memories of the previous two bodies. If all of this was true, it meant that some of his actions were not under his control, and there might even be another him emerging to act on his behalf. This filled his heart with fear and anger. After calming down, he began to think about how to get rid of this restraint. At this moment, he seemed to think of something and brought out Creation Pauline. He sensed that a force was about to fall, but he did not know whether it was the lost part of Xiang Jue's Weili or another Vedanta that was about to fall. In the Qinghuan Palace, after Zhang Yan's body of strength had improved again, he had been trying to figure out and observe the Tao here. At this time, in his senses, he could sense the specific changes in the position of Xiang Jue and Pauline in the hands of the purple-clothed Taoist. This was a huge advantage in a battle. If combined with his own senses, he could even grasp some of the movements of the master behind Pauline. However, he also withdrew his senses slightly. If he paid too much attention, it would definitely arouse the vigilance of Xiang Jue, so maintaining the current state was the most suitable. In the careful study, more than 100 years had passed unknowingly. As he sat in meditation, he felt a strange movement in the Weili, and after a little calculation, he knew that Wei Ming was coming towards him. Thus, after waiting for a moment, he came out of Bushutian. Wei Ming had arrived at this moment, and when he saw him coming out, he bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. This time, I have come here according to the previous agreement, to exchange the land of creation under my rule with fellow Taoist for observation." There were actually many places of creation because now, even if all the known places of creation were gathered, and even if Bushutian was included, it would still be far from the level of the essence of creation that day. It was just that the easiest places of creation had almost all been found, and the rest were hidden in the depths of nothingness. He had a feeling that it would be difficult for him to find other places of creation before the next Vedanta arrived, so it would be better to exchange and observe first. This way, no matter what choice the Vedanta made in the future, he would not be at a disadvantage. Zhang Yan nodded. He had promised this a long time ago, so he naturally would not go back on his word. In fact, if there was a place similar to Bushutian, he did not mind exchanging for observation. After all, these were external objects, and those that could be used by his own family were truly useful. He immediately waved his sleeve and opened the door to the 3 places of creation under his rule. He said, "Fellow Taoist, feel free to observe." his heart skipped a beat. At this moment, he had 3 places of creation in his hands, and this did not escape Zhang Yan's notice. However, what shocked him was that the 3 places of creation that Zhang Yan gave him had the same essence of creation as the places of creation that he had. This meant that the things that Zhang Yan could see were far more than what he had previously thought. He shook his head and suppressed his thoughts. He decided to observe the places of creation first, and put everything else aside. However, just as he was about to do so, a strange feeling appeared in his heart. At this moment, Zhang Yan also seemed to feel it. His eyes flashed slightly, and he raised his head to look at the place where the nothingness had broken. There seemed to be a force that was returning to everything. Chapter 2207. Zhang Yan could see that there were many Weili mixed in this power, and they were all trying to break through. However, under the suppression of the tribulation power, only 3 or 4 of them had a chance of breaking through the shackles and breaking out. Among them, there was one aura that was most likely to succeed that gave him a familiar feeling. He thought that it was someone he had dealt with in the past. He could tell who it was with just a little bit of effort. He thought that if this person returned, then the current peaceful situation might be broken. However, he had been preparing for any eventualities for a long time. Even if things really developed in the direction he expected, as long as he had enough power, everything would not be a problem. Wei Ming stared at the void crack for a long time, but he felt that there was something wrong there. The return of a great virtue was indeed within his expectations, but according to his calculations, the next fellow Taoist would actually come later, but now he could make it in time. His calculations would not be wrong under normal circumstances, unless there was some external force driving it. He could not help but think of the spirit of creation, and his heart instantly became more vigilant. He slowly retracted his gaze and said to Zhang Yan, "Fellow Taoist, it seems that another fellow Taoist will return." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's right, the momentum has been formed, and it's time for him to return." Wei Ming said tentatively, "I see that the incarnation of the person who is most likely to return seems to have fought with fellow Taoist before?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The incarnation of a Weili is an incarnation after all, and not all of the person. As long as it is not the spirit of creation and does not take the initiative to cause trouble, I will naturally not vent my anger on this person because of the past." Wei Ming nodded subconsciously, but he also knew that even if Zhang Yan did not cause trouble, it did not mean that this person would not make a move, and there was even a high chance that he would be involved. But no matter what, as long as it was beneficial to him, and there was a possibility of success, he would definitely do it without hesitation. Because the arrival of that power would not be a matter of a moment, he did not pay any more attention to it before the results appeared. He just waved his sleeve and opened the gates of the 3 places of creation under his rule, and he cupped his hands and said, "Please observe, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan nodded and looked at the 3 places of fortune. He had been observing places like Bu Su Heaven for a long time, so he was very familiar with the essence of creation. These places of creation were not very strong, so it wouldn't take him long to understand their mysteries. Xiang Ju was meditating somewhere in the void when he suddenly woke up. He also sensed that the energy was seeping into everything, and he couldn't help feeling refreshed. He had also calculated that it would be a long time before the next Vedanta would arrive. Therefore, he guessed that the commotion was caused by the purple-robed Taoist communicating with the true body behind him. Therefore, the spirit of creation was trying to send his Weili back. In fact, he did not have much hope in this matter. The spirit of creation was also trapped in the tribulation power, so it was unlikely that it would be able to display much of its power. Last time, it helped him find the lotus of fate and brought it back to all things. He guessed that it was probably because there were countless spirits of creation and lands of creation in all things. These things were originally one with the lotus of fate, and coupled with his own chi dynamic, it was slightly easier to find the lotus of fate. But to send his Weili back was not a simple matter. Not only did he need to break through the robbery power, but he also needed to break through the entanglement of the magic power of his peers. He believed that this was an opportunity that the other party had found for him, but he still needed to support him in order to succeed. Therefore, he did not dare to be negligent, and immediately lifted up Creation Pauline and tried to slowly pull his Whaley back. After this attempt, a trace of power was indeed retrieved, and he quickly absorbed it into his body. However, he immediately felt that something was wrong. Although he had retrieved these Whaley, there was only a little more than usual. This meant that there was actually no special force behind this, and it was just him who was guiding them. After observing for a moment, he could not help but frown. He discovered that the reason for this was that another Vedanta was about to return, and he had almost seized all the gaps that could be used to break through into everything. If this continued, the Whaley he retrieved would only become less and less, and when that person returned, even the only connection he had would be severed. He could not help but suspect that if this attempt to break through the robbery power was really the work of the spirit of creation, its purpose might be to push this person to enter everything, and not to help him. However, he was not the slightest bit angry because if he could pull another peer over to his side, it would actually be more useful than him retrieving all the Whaley. He thought to himself, "It seems that I can only see the situation clearly after this person returns." At the place where the void silence was, that chi activity permeated for a long time, and finally pushed away all the other forces, and rushed into the void silence. The Vedanta Whaley entered the world, and the robbery power leaked out, causing countless worlds to shake. Zhang Yan did not do anything this time. When Wei Ming returned, it was him who used Creation Pauline to bear the robbery power. As for Xiang Ju's return, it was Wei Ming who did this. Therefore, this time, if he wanted to protect everything, it was reasonable for Xiang Ju to take action, and they should have a tacit understanding. At this moment, Xiang Ju did not hesitate. He did not even have a place of creation under his rule, and naturally did not want to see everything destroyed. He immediately used his mind, and took out Creation Pauline to bear the robbery power. The Whaley suddenly gathered, and at the same time, the Taoist in purple felt the chi activity that Ji Zhuang had deposited in Pauline suddenly moved, and then a force took it away. In the next moment, a figure walked out of the void silence. It was Ji Zhuang Daoren. He returned to everything, and immediately summoned Pauline, and deposited his Whaley into it. However, at this moment, he felt that something was wrong. He felt that something was missing in Pauline. But when he looked again, the lotus petals were neat, and not a single one was missing. He pondered for a moment, and thought that there might be a part of the power that had not returned, and that was why it was like this. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt someone's divine will coming over. His thoughts turned, and he did not resist. With a move of his mind, he entered the divine will. In an unknown place, Xiang Ju was already waiting there. When he saw him, he bowed and said, "I Xiang Ju, Taoist Ji Zhuang, greetings." Ji Zhuang raised his hand and bowed. Xiang Ju smiled and said, "I took the liberty to call you here because there is something that concerns my generation, and I have to explain it to you. I hope you won't blame me." Ji Zhuang glanced at him and said, "Oh? What is it?" Xiang Ju said, "Since you have returned, you should be able to feel that the layout of everything is very different from before the essence of creation was broken." Ji Zhuang nodded and said, "Compared to before, it is easier for us to find the Tao." Xiang Ju said meaningfully, "But there are also many people who are blocking the way." Ji Zhuang waited in silence and did not speak. Xiang Ju smiled and said, "Do you know about the spirit of creation?" Ji Zhuang replied, "I haven't forgotten about it." Xiang Ju nodded inwardly. Since Ji Zhuang knew about this, it meant that his return to the Whaley was more complete. After all, a part of his power had fallen into the void. He said, "Now, there are only two people that I fear. One is the spirit of creation. He needs to devour us to complete his Tao. The other is that Taoist Shen Yuan. He has occupied Bu Su Tian, and many of the lands of creation that we have seen so far are under his rule, and he does not allow us to study them. Thus, the Tao that we seek is blocked by him." Ji Zhuang glanced at him and said, "From what I heard, you seem to have suffered a great loss at the hands of that Taoist Shen Yuan." Xiang Ju did not deny it and admitted that Taoist Shen Yuan used the excuse of guarding against the spirit of creation to fight with me. He has Bu Su Tian and many lands of creation as his backing. It was difficult for me to defeat him. In the end, I lost by one move." He paused and smiled. "From what I can see, Taoist Ji Zhuang, the Weili that was left in all things was eliminated by this Taoist Shen Yuan, right?" Ji Zhuang did not deny this. He had retracted all the Weili and knew everything that happened before. However, he was not the original Ji Zhuang. The one that died was only his Weili avatar. Moreover, he had successfully returned, so there was not much of a ripple in his heart. It was just that Zhang Yan had taken the Mirror Lake. It was impossible to say that he did not have any opinions about it. Compared to this, he was more afraid of the spirit of creation. It could place an avatar in all things, and it was very difficult to distinguish it from the real one. Therefore, he was wary of Xiangju. Xiangju knew that it was difficult to win people's trust by himself. Only benefits could move people, so he used what he said before dawn to try to persuade Ji Zhuang to work with him to force Zhang Yan to give in so that everyone could enjoy the lands of creation. After hearing this, Ji Zhuang thought for a while. In fact, this method was for them to work together and force Zhang Yan to hand over the lands of creation. This method was very beneficial to people like him who came later, but the premise was that they could suppress Zhang Yan. After all, Bu Su Tian was Bu Su Tian. The two of them working together would not be able to take him down. Moreover, before Xiangju arrived, there were already two people who could do this. If they could do this, they would have done it long ago. Therefore, he said, looking around, other than Taoist Shen Yuan, there is another fellow cultivator who has returned. What did he say? Xiangju laughed. I will invite this fellow cultivator over. With that, he immediately used his divine will to summon him. A moment later, Wei Ming appeared and cupped his hands in greeting. Greetings, fellow Taoists. Ji Zhuang and Xiangju also greeted him. After greeting each other, Xiangju directly said to Wei Ming, I have an agreement with fellow cultivators. When the time is right, we will share the lands of creation with fellow cultivators. I wonder if fellow cultivators are still willing to keep their promise? Wei Ming looked at the two and said, Fellow cultivators, do you think that the time has come? Xiangju smiled. I have fought with Taoist Shen Yuan before, so I have some understanding of his strength. If it was just the two of us, it would indeed be difficult for us to defeat him. But if the three of us work together, it will not be difficult for us to defeat him. Chapter 2208. Wei Ming judged that the three of them working together might not be enough to take down Bu Su Tian, but it was still possible to force Zhang Yan to give up the other places of fortune. He looked at Ji Zhuang. If he agreed, then there was a chance of success. If he didn't, then he could only continue waiting. He had the places of fortune in his hands, so there was no need to rush. Ji Zhuang pondered for a while. If the three of them worked together, then the threat of the spirits of fortune could be ignored. Even if he hid among them, he wouldn't dare to make a move. He looked at Xiangju and said, I heard from fellow Xiangju that you used your avatars to determine the ownership of the places of fortune. Can we also find Taoist Shen Yuan for a fight this time? That way, we won't really have a falling out. Wei Ming shook his head. Don't count on it too much. I'm afraid none of us can say we can beat Taoist Shen Yuan in a one-on-one fight. But if we try to outnumber him, he won't agree no matter what. Ji Zhuang thought about it again and said, No matter what, if we take the initiative to find him, then we'll be in the wrong. I think it's better to wait for him to come to us and then propose a fight. That way, we might be able to force him to compromise. Xiangju's expression changed. You mean that we should find the places of fortune first? If he comes to us again, then we can turn the tables on him? Ji Zhuang nodded. That's right. Wei Ming asked, but what if he doesn't come? Ji Zhuang said, Taoist Shen Yuan doesn't know that the three of us are working together. Even if he has suspicions, he can't confirm it. So he'll most likely take this opportunity to test us. If that doesn't work, then we'll go find him. Xiangju said, So you're saying that we should find a place of fortune first? Ji Zhuang held out the Pauline in his hand. I still have Weili Pauline in my hand, and fellow Taoist Pauline still has robbery power that hasn't been dissolved. If we want to fight, we'll have to wait for a while. Let's use this time to find a place of fortune. Xiangju thought for a moment and said, very well. Wei Ming said, gentlemen, there's another problem. If we fight with Taoist Jinyuan, we'll all be injured, and if we're not careful, we might even lose our lives. If he kills us in a fit of rage, we might not be able to stop him. Ji Zhuang furrowed his brows. Once Zhuyu is destroyed, other than Bu Shutian, the other blessed lands will be destroyed as well. I'm afraid it won't be beneficial to him. Wei Ming shook his head and said, but we won't get anything either. The three of them discussed it for a while and felt that this was the most extreme way of doing things. It wouldn't benefit anyone, but they couldn't rule out this possibility. Therefore, it would be best to suppress Zhang Yan with their power and force him to yield. They wouldn't fight if they could avoid it. If it really didn't work, then they could only try their best to protect Zhuyu. With the Pauline in their hands, it was still possible to suppress the other person's Weili. After the discussion, Ji Zhuang looked at the two of them and said, the Mirror Lake was originally my place of residence, and there are still remnants of my teachings there. Now that it's occupied by someone else, I should at least say hello. As he said this, he waved the Pauline in his hand and sent a strand of Weili into the Mirror Lake. In the Mirror Lake, under the ground of a certain world, hundreds of Luo sect disciples were worshipping the portrait of the demon god. Due to the continuous suppression of the sect of Yen, they could only hide in remote places and never gathered more than 1,000 people. Otherwise, too much qi dynamic would expose them. The Luo sect was not like the sect of Yen, which didn't require spiritual vigor to cultivate. It was destined that this branch of Tao could only be spread in the world where spiritual vigor was more abundant. Fortunately, the Luo sect only needed to worship the demon god to obtain supernatural powers, so the threshold to enter was also relatively low. Logically speaking, as long as there were such portraits circulating in the world, the teachings of Tao would not go extinct. This was also the reason why the sect could not be completely eradicated. As the worship of these sect members ended this time, a priest with a higher status came forward and prepared to put away the sacrificial table. However, at this moment, his footsteps suddenly stopped. The demon god's eyes turned and shot out 2 beams of light, which fell on a young disciple below. Under the disciple's stunned expression, his cultivation experience rose layer by layer. At this moment, there were countless methods of operation and cultivation experience flowing through his mind, so that he could restrain his mana at the same time, so that it would not affect the Luo sect Taoists at the side. When the qi dynamic calmed down, the one who stayed at the same place was no longer the young boy, but a Taoist with deep qi dynamic and sharp eyes. He said in a deep voice, everyone, just now, I have received the teachings of the Patriarch and have understood the supreme method. With my protection, there is no need to fear the sect of Yan's expedition. Not only him, at this moment, almost every place where the Luo sect members gathered in the Mirror Lake, there were such people appearing continuously. The creation Pauline in Ji Zhuang's hand suddenly trembled and quickly reached out to comfort him. He felt that his power that penetrated into the Mirror Lake was quickly cut off. Obviously, the Weili that Zhang Yan left here responded spontaneously. However, he still raised the mana of many Luo sect disciples. These spirits were mixed with his own Weili and were destined to be unable to integrate into his Tao. But now that the Mirror Lake was not in his hands, it did not matter. His purpose was only to protect the Luo sect and ensure that the followers could have the power to resist the suppression of the sect of Yen. In fact, he also knew that doing so could not change the ending of the Mirror Lake Luo sect. Now that Zhang Yan was the master of the Mirror Lake, even if he did not eliminate the unexpected variables, he could continuously send his subordinates to solve the matter. At most, it would just cause a little trouble for the others. But such a move was in fact expressing his own attitude to Wei Ming and Xiangjue. It could be said that he had made a clear choice of position. Wei Ming sighed. Since Ji Zhuang had already expressed his position, he had no choice but to do something. He said, after the divine will is out, the 3 places of creation under my rule can be freely observed by the 2 of you. Xiangjue said, in that case, we will first go back and wait, and find the place of creation while we are at it. After we have resolved the power in the Pauline, We will discuss reason with that Taoist Shenyuan. And in Busushan, after the sect of Yen received more and more help from the cultivators of the 9 continents, they began to take the initiative to clear the territories that they could not conquer. Among them, Yuan Zhangqing took the greatest credit. He did not stop after killing the demons. The territories that were originally occupied by the great demons were almost wiped out in the blink of an eye. The followers of the sect of Yen occupied these places one after another, and their power suddenly expanded a lot on the original foundation. On a certain land, after Tang Yu inspected a branch altar, he looked at the cultivators of the 9 continents who flew away, but his expression was solemn. A protector walked to his side and said, "I wonder what troubles you, elder?" Tang Yu sighed. "The thing that we have been waiting for a long time has been easily solved by these cultivators." Protector Xing said, "Isn't this a good thing?" Tang Yu said, "The cultivation of these cultivators is far higher than the sect of Yen. They are kind to me now, but what if there is a day when there is discord between us?" Protector Xing said, "It doesn't have to be like this, right? For example, didn't the headmaster of Anjin Temple and that Yuan Shangzhen have a deep relationship with the headmaster?" Tang Yu said, "You don't have to worry about these two, but there are more cultivators in the outside world than I have seen. The sect of Yen is far from comparable." Protector Xing said, "I heard that there are many talents in the other altars. For example, there is a protector called Meng Hu in the Xian Mirror altar. His cultivation speed is really unimaginable. In another 100 years, he might be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the elder." Tang Yu said, "Oh? There is such a talent. I would like to meet him when I have the time." Protector Xing said with a smile, "This kind of handsome elder needs to be met. In fact, as long as we wait when the followers of the sect grow stronger, no one will be able to threaten us." Tang Yu said, "I hope so." At this moment, a disciple rushed over and handed over a jade talisman, saying, "Elder, the Xian Mirror altar has just now sent a talisman to ask for help." Tang Yu's expression turned serious. He took it and looked at it. The talisman said that in one night, there were many tyrannical Taoists in the Luo denomination. They killed many Taoists from the 9 continents who went on a punitive expedition. Among them were some cultivators with high cultivation experience. Hundreds of altars had fallen, so they asked for help from the main altar. He kept the talisman and said in a deep voice, "Protector Xing, you are right. It is not the time to think about these things. Send an edict on my behalf and invite more Taoists from the 9 continents to come here." Protector Xing was surprised. "Where are you going, elder?" Tang Yu said, "The Xian Mirror altar is in danger. This is not a small matter. I have to personally go to the altar to help and see if the protector Meng you mentioned is able to take on such a big responsibility." After Ji Zhuang retreated from the divine will, he borrowed a place of fortune from Wei Ming. Then, he released his spiritual energy and began to dissolve the power of the lotus treasure. At the same time, he began to search for a place of fortune. His Weili used to be immersed in everything for a long time. Even though his incarnation was turned into nothingness by Zhang Yan, there was still a lot of residual power left in this place. Based on his understanding of the void, it only took him about 100 years to find the place of creation. However, because the Weili had not been completely dissolved, he did not immediately occupy it. Another 10 years passed. Just now, he had completely dissolved the Weili. He then asked Xiangjue and found out that Xiangjue had also dissolved the robbery power. Only then did he release his mana. He wasn't mistaken. There was indeed a land of fortune in the realm he sensed earlier. Hence, he left the realm and directly refined it. Then, he settled down within the realm and waited for Zhang Yan to find him. Unexpectedly, after waiting for a long time, there was no movement from Bu Shutian's side. Thus, he used his divine will to contact Perception and Weiming, asking whether they should continue waiting or change their original plan and directly go to Bu Shutian's place. Weiming pondered for a while and said, "I think that the reason why Taoist Xinyuan did not come to him is because he thinks that Taoist Ji Zhuang's incarnation has long existed in the void and is not a body borrowed by the spirit of creation. Perhaps only Taoist Xiangjue's action could attract him." Xiangjue said in a low voice, "The more places of creation appear, the harder it is to find them." How can it be easy to find another one? Even if we can find it, that Taoist Xianyuan might not come. I don't think we need to wait any longer. The three of us will go find him now and try to convince him to share the land of fortune with us. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.